the Industrial Revolution of the Mage Lord. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction. So don't try any techniques you hear here in real life, your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 626 Hopeless Exile. Gazing at the vast makeshift camp stretching down the hillside, Ismail felt a mixture of emotions. Following the Pope's orders, he and Rivera led moderate church leaders and over 3,000 Inquisitor Knights of the Order of Radiance to evacuate nearly the entire population of 10,000 Saints City from the barbarian invasion of Gorys. Such a massive migration was impossible to ensure a smooth and orderly process. Less than 50 miles away, news arrived from behind that the Holy City's northern wall had been completely breached. The Divine Punishment sect, who had been sending repeated signals for assistance, suffered heavy casualties and were clearly unable to withstand the enemy's overwhelming attack. Ismail had no intention of returning to support them. He persisted in resisting despite knowing he was outmatched, ultimately ending up buried with the Holy City. His personal honor and reputation seemed unimportant compared to the heavy trust His Holiness had entrusted him with preserving the Church's flame. He and Rivera were perfectly comfortable shouldering the responsibility of betraying the glory of the gods and abandoning their colleagues. Bamoya, leaning towards the Divine Punishment faction, initially insisted on remaining. After the Cathedral of Radiance completely collapsed amidst the earth-shattering tremors, he finally realized the situation had deteriorated beyond repair and, with a small group of Bloodline Knights, joined the retreating force. However, he and Ismail had a bitter disagreement over their next move. Bamoya saw Duke Carlo, on the border of the Duchy of Berkeley, as the last straw for the exiled church. He intended to persuade them to contact this border duke, whose power had recently declined after being attacked by Saint Valen. By leveraging his status as a descendant of the Kaufman family, he could help the church regain its footing and establish a new core diocese. Ismail simply despised the border Duke of Berkeley. He couldn't even defend his own fiefdom, Bluethorn City, and was caught off guard by a mere force of about 1,000 men dispatched by the Mage Emperor of St. Valen, forcing him to abandon the city and flee. He waited until the enemy, satisfied with the looting, withdrew before cautiously returning to his capital to clean up the mess. Such a coward, fleeing without a fight, was simply unreliable. Furthermore, the Kaufman family, a fence-sitter who always played both sides, including higher-ranking spellcasters affiliated with the High Wizard Council, was unlikely to unilaterally side with the church. After careful consideration, Rivera chose to side with Ismail. The outnumbered Bamoa, accompanied by the few hundred remaining Bloodline Knights and battle priests of the Divine Punishment faction, left the main force at night and headed straight for the Principality of Berkeley. As his thoughts were churning, a cardinal hurried to his side and whispered, "Your Excellency Ismail, the message sent to the independent diocese of Pharaohs or Aruvia has just received a reply." He paused, his face looking a little ugly. "The archbishops of the two dioceses have expressed their willingness to accept the exiled believers and people, but the border lords of the two countries are adamant. They will not allow the Knights of the Inquisition and the combat priests to cross the border at will, especially Pharaohs. They even directly informed the branch of the Spellcasters Union stationed in their country, intending to gather troops to block us directly at the border." Ismail was stunned for a moment and sighed. "More than 3,000 Knights of the Inquisition are a powerful force that any secular kingdom is afraid of and wary of. No one can easily let us enter their country. Those border lords dare not take on this responsibility. I can fully understand. This is why, before His Holiness disappeared, he instructed him to split the army and believers into several branches and move them to dioceses and monasteries in various parts of the southern countries. This is truly the only viable solution right now." Rivera pondered for a long moment before speaking slowly, a look of worry on his face. "But the Holy City was suddenly attacked, and we were forced to evacuate. The people were swept away by the army in a panic, like refugees. Most of them don't even have enough rations and supplies. I'm afraid they won't make it to their destination. While the City of Grace is nominally the papal state, its actual territory is limited to the city of Gorys, a few surrounding mountainous areas, and several large monasteries that protect the Holy City." Its tens of thousands of believers rarely engage in farming or animal husbandry, relying entirely on regular donations from the various dioceses in the southern border and a steady stream of food and supplies imported through taxes on believers. Normally, relying on the Vatican's wealth, the frequent relief distributions and masses are enough to keep people fed. Most believers live a simple and self-disciplined life, and possess few personal possessions or possessions. As for the Vatican's personnel and families, they were only concerned with taking gold, silver, and books and documents when evacuating the Holy City, neglecting the more crucial food supplies. It's hard to say whether to describe them as greedy or short-sighted. Even with the Vatican's troops escorting the evacuation, the immediate problem of food became a pressing one. Have the Vatican's priests and the inquisitors allocate a portion of their rations and distribute them to the faithful first to provide some temporary relief. Ismail frowned and ordered. Send a few teams of bloodline knights south to purchase food and medicine from the lords and wealthy families in the towns and villages they pass through. Don't be stingy with money. If the fleeing army becomes riotous due to famine, it will be difficult to control the situation. The cardinal nodded solemnly and turned to leave. Rivera hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. In the past, most of the church's secular affairs in the Holy City were handled by Bamoa and his divine punishment bishops. Now that this burden has been placed in our hands, we're struggling to even resolve the most basic issues. I feel truly ashamed. Ismail, a cardinal who had been a high priest, had spent the vast majority of his life dealing with canonical texts and rituals. Despite his considerable contributions to the study of divine arts, he had never dabbled in other mundane matters. Rivera, a papal mystic, was, needless to say, a spiritually pure ascetic, possessing no even supernatural powers. Pope Zai's choice to entrust them with the heavy responsibility of restoring the Church's glory was a blind gamble with uncertain success. Sometimes I can't help but wonder, if we hadn't allowed a divine punishment faction to rise, and if we had maintained a peaceful and close alliance with the spellcaster union, would the Holy City have been spared the disaster of the alien invasion? Rivera stood quietly behind him, choosing not to answer. Just then, a bloodline knight galloped up the slope where the two men were standing, dismounted, and knelt on one knee to report, St. Valen and the Northern United Kingdom have sent a team of envoys, requesting an audience with the two bishops. Chapter 627 Watchdog. When two envoys, dressed in contrasting styles, entered the tent side by side, Cardinals Ismail and Rivera were stunned. The younger man in black was easy to identify. This was the standard uniform of the St. Valen United Kingdom Army, with a castle spear emblem embroidered on the chest and shoulders, making it instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with the Northern Army's origins. But the other middle-aged man, with slightly graying hair and a stained clerical robe, struck a chord with the two cardinals. They had no idea how many of these lower-level clergy had been secretly infiltrated and bribed, and only now had the truth been revealed, a slap in the face. Your Excellency the two bishops, this is Captain Farrell, the Counselor of the General Staff of the Western Theatre of the United Kingdom of the North and St. Valen. The middle-aged priest pointed at himself again and said apologetically, as for me, I'm not in a position to tell you in detail about my specific position, please just call me Beetle. Ismail's face looked a little ugly, and he forced a nod and said, what will of the Emperor of the North do you two intend to convey by coming here in person? We urge you to stop evacuating to the south, Farrell said concisely, as if he was not afraid of the two powerful church leaders in front of him, but looked at them with contempt as if they were defeated. If our intelligence is correct, the border lords of Pharos, Iruvia, and the Principality of Barclay, have all rejected your request to enter the country, and are even planning to gather troops to block the border to stop you. Rivera was not good at pretense, and he admitted directly and frankly, yes, exiled believers can easily become refugees and attack local villages and towns. What's more, we have more than 3,000 knights of the Inquisition accompanying us. For those noble lords, it is tantamount to a threat like an army approaching the border. Ismail immediately made up for it. So, according to the instructions of His Holiness the Pope, we will disperse the exiled people and the Inquisition into dozens of small troops, and relocate them to parishes throughout the southern border, striving not to affect the local aristocratic forces. Farrell shrugged and shook his head. These arrangements are not important. We are here this time, on the order of His Majesty the Emperor, urging you to stop evacuating south. After that, he took out a document stamped with the official seal of the kingdom from his arms, stood up and handed it to the cardinal, who was stunned on the spot. Ismail quickly opened it and read the few lines of content that was less than half a page from beginning to end. He stood up suddenly and said in disbelief, "Your emperor asks us to return to the holy city of Gors." The middle-aged man nicknamed Beetle nodded and patiently explained, "According to the agreement reached between your majesty and Pope Zai, we have successfully blocked the alien enemies who invaded the holy city and completely cut off their route of reinforcement. But your majesty does not intend to occupy Gors directly, nor does he have any plans for long-term garrison, so you want to force us to return and help you clean up the remaining aliens in the holy city and guard the gap that has been blocked by the saints." Rivera immediately understood and asked hesitantly. "The Divine Punishment faction has taken away most of the high-ranking combat priests. Ordinary bloodline knights are no match for the hordes of winged ones. Forcing us to return to the holy city is nothing more than a way to get us killed." Ismail sighed, staring at Captain Farrell. "If I'm not mistaken, even if we disperse and force a retreat south, the border lords of the various nations will be forced by your pressure to send troops to defend the city, right?" Farrell spread his hands and said, "So I hope the two bishops won't act so stubbornly and throw so many soldiers and civilians into the fire pit. Besides, returning to the holy city is not a sure thing. The winged ones have long been wiped out by our special forces. The ones who still remain in the city are mostly ground combat forces, numbering no more than 1,000. You can easily handle it." Rivera pondered for a moment, then asked, "Even if we successfully repel the remaining alien races in the city, the holy city has been completely destroyed by war and subsidence. Without food reserves, medicine, and necessary daily necessities, how can these nearly 10,000 believers and civilians start to live again in the ruins?" Farrell seemed to have expected them to say this, and he raised the corner of his mouth and said, "Don't worry, as long as the Holy See is willing to sign a gatekeeper agreement with us, the United Kingdom is willing to provide you with food, medicine and necessary relief supplies. The holy city of Gors will also be included in our military control area. Once the alien race makes a comeback, the western war zone on the border of Yalide will immediately dispatch air forces to support you." Gatekeeper agreement? Ismail and Rivera exchanged a glance, grinning wryly. "Tie us to the ruins of the holy city, and let us guard the gaps between the saints that have been blocked by the collapse. As long as we obey, we will receive food and supplies." "It seems that this should be called the Watchdog Agreement," the intelligence officer codenamed Beetle chuckled and said with a hint of sarcasm, "This is His Majesty's forgiveness of the moderates. In the past, you didn't directly participate in the conspiracy that triggered the civil unrest in St. Valen, and you can only be considered tacitly accomplices in the Divine Punishment faction's actions against spellcasters. Rather than evacuating to the independent parishes in the southern countries and waiting to be gradually eliminated by us, it is better to return to the holy city and hold out. At least you can preserve the last spark of faith for the church." Ismail clenched his fists and said with difficulty, You plan to purge all church forces in the southern countries. According to the agreement between His Majesty and Pope Zai, the Divine Punishment faction must be completely eliminated, while the moderate faction will be gathered and sent back to the holy city to reunite with you remaining behind." Farrell and the other man stood up, bowed, and said goodbye. "The detailed agreement will be delivered along with the relief supplies before you depart for Goris. We will then meet with the two bishops again, before opening the camp tent and leaving." Intelligence Officer Beetle seemed to remember something and turned to Ismail with a smile. "I forgot to remind His Majesty, there's no need to send your knights to nearby towns to procure food. The entire territory of Yared is now under our military control, and all the people have been relocated to St. Valen. You won't be able to buy a single grain of food." Watching the two hurriedly departing figures, Ismail felt that all the humiliation and contempt he had endured in his life had never been as unbearable as this scene. The Northern Emperor had simply dispatched two unknown officers to clearly arrange the future fate of the church's survivors, and offered them no room for refusal. The Gatekeeper Agreement turns Goris into a cage to imprison and detain us. Chapter 628 Main Battle Armor. In the northern wastelands, at the River Valley Outpost, the railway tracks, originating in Spark City, extend all the way here. Future plans call for a direct route across the center of the wasteland, ultimately reaching the newly completed Great Bear Lake base. Compared to the bustling north-south line and the east expansion baseline, which constantly transports vast quantities of supplies, this short northern railway line seems somewhat deserted. Not only does it have only one magic-powered train, which primarily serves to transport troops stationed there, but it's also used for rotating troops. Even among the general public, it's clear that the Northern Railway line was built for a single purpose, to defend against foreign invasions. But today, the outpost seemed busier than usual. 2 chief executives from the Royal Capital Alchemy Weapons Laboratory were present, planning a closed test of a new weapon. Shield Fran McCollin, special advisor to the new Union's Northern Army, had also been invited to participate in the test. The research project he was involved in on the lizardman population had been progressing slowly lately. To ease his stress, the other team members had either chosen to fill in as substitute teachers at the Spellcaster Academy or participate in seminars at the Academy of Magical Sciences. He wasn't particularly interested in either of these projects. After all, he'd had enough of life in the Magic City. Applying for military service and participating in their combat drills and weapons testing was much more interesting. For example, today's closed-door testing of a new armored vehicle at the outpost was a good example. While the specific artifacts were unclear, they were undoubtedly related to the application of magical energy and the creation of souls. From his first encounter with the power of the Oblivion Lance to his encounters with even more powerful magical weapons in the north, he'd seen firsthand rapid-fire magic rifles, sniper magic rifles, magic revolvers, magic bolters, beam energy cannons, portable magic cannons, and magic naval cannons. The Magical Weapons Research and Development Center founded by Harvey regularly upgrades existing weaponry, while also developing new weapons. After rigorous testing, these weapons are quickly deployed on the battlefield, generating precise feedback on their practical application. They are the heart of this nation's war machine. Today's test isn't actually a truly new weapon, but rather a bold refinement of the alchemical vehicle and war beast. Magic Shield has seen and experienced both of these items many times, so while they're nothing new, the opportunity to exchange ideas with the 2 kingdom leaders is a welcome relief. Chris and Benoit, though alchemists, are also exceptionally well-versed research mages. Having served as Harvey's laboratory assistants for years, they've been constantly exposed to the latest advancements in magical energy applications and soul creation theory, earning them the status of professors who are considered pioneers. I heard that today's weapon is a new type of war beast that is improved by combining artillery and alchemical vehicles. Chris and Benoit looked at each other, and at the same time gave Fadden a mysterious smile, and said in unison, "Mr. Macabre, let us keep it in suspense for now. The technicians are carrying out a final debugging, and we will be able to see its true appearance soon, so please be patient." Fadden shrugged in understanding, and then smiled. "If I'm not mistaken, this should be another creation of His Majesty Harvey, right?" Chris nodded and pointed to the new vehicle that was slowly driving out of the closed hangar. "Of course, His Majesty has long proposed a research and development plan for armored vehicles. This thing looks completely different from a conventional open-type alchemical wheelbarrow, and it does not rely on sturdy mechanical legs to move like a war beast, but it obviously stitches the advantages of both. It looks like a square box, fully armed with camouflage-painted steel plates, with only half of the bottom exposed. Wheels? Those are armored tracks. Compared to wheels and mechanical legs, they're more maneuverable and swift over rough terrain," Chris said proudly, pointing to a thick gun barrel protruding from the roof. "That's its core value." Only then did Fadden realize they'd actually mounted the gun directly on this armored vehicle. Furthermore, 2 clustered gun barrels jutted out from either side of the vehicle, clearly rotatable and adjustable. It was a terrifying war machine, armed to the teeth. Fadden could easily imagine the soldiers maneuvering the armored vehicle into a horde of lizardmen. The roof-mounted gun could practically bombard the enemy head-on, and the area of effect damage from the shrapnel shells would quickly clear any obstacles in its path. The ferocious machine guns on either side provided flank protection, their barrage of fire turning any enemy within range into a hornet's nest. Even the rear of the vehicle had several circular holes reserved for observation and shooting, a design that offered virtually no blind spots. The rain of black crystal spikes and spears barely damaged the thick steel armor. It was likely that only the enemy's concentrated red beam attacks could penetrate the vehicle's exterior defenses. Benoit seemed to see Fadden's confusion and explained with a smile, "An ordinary single-shot red lightning attack can only cause slight damage to the 3 layers of stacked steel armor. Although the explosion caused by the concentrated red light is more violent, it cannot penetrate the protection, let alone overturn the vehicle." Fadden swallowed his saliva, looked at the 2 deep grooves plowed by the armored tracks on the hardened ground, and asked dryly, "How much does this armored vehicle weigh?" 20,000 pounds, even without counting the magic minerals mixed in. The steel consumed in casting this armored vehicle alone is enough to create a set of pure steel armor for each of the hundreds of elite knights. Faden calmed down, and felt a mixture of excitement and excitement in his chest. He couldn't wait to see what kind of devastating blow this armored vehicle could cause to those large numbers of fearless alien monsters after it was officially put into the battlefield. An armored vehicle is required to carry 8 personnel, a pilot and a co-pilot, 4 personnel responsible for weapon control and fire, and 2 personnel responsible for detection, observation, and receiving command signals. Chris spoke at length about the vehicle's details, his spirits high. As a military advisor, Faden was free from the constraints of confidentiality regulations. He leaned in and whispered, "Is this a trump card weapon for the upcoming general attack on the second floating island main fortress from the Ice Sea base?" Benoit nodded repeatedly and whispered, "Unfortunately, mass production isn't possible yet. According to His Majesty's plan, even if the military factories were operating at full capacity, they could only produce 5 units per month. They would then have to be disassembled and shipped long distances to the ice sea front. The cost of transporting materials would be astronomical." Chapter 629 Military Control. Less than 2 weeks after leaving Goris, he returned to a place completely transformed. Ismail had initially thought himself prepared for any shock, but once he passed through the shattered, collapsed gate and entered the holy city, he was speechless at the sight before him. The sky was completely shrouded in leaden clouds, and the air was filled with a pungent, acrid odor, the distinct scent of intensely burning dragon flame powder, mingled with the stench of rust, perhaps the lingering scent of black water and blood from the fallen aliens. The entire city was beyond description, not a single intact building remained. Houses and streets looked as if they had been plowed evenly by a giant plow, leaving only waist-high walls and foundations intact. Vast circular craters, several meters in diameter, were everywhere on the ground. These were the distinctive marks left by the explosions of St. Veron's alchemical weapons. Just looking at the charred remains of bodies left untouched near the craters gave one a glimpse into the terrifying power of these weapons. Captain Farrell and the intelligence officer nicknamed Beetle met them again at the city gate. This time, they brought the detailed documents of the gatekeeper agreement and a group of civilian officials surrounded by soldiers. "Your Excellency, after the agreement is signed, we will register all church members living in Goris in accordance with the provisions. This will facilitate the distribution of relief supplies and daily security management." Ishmael clenched his fist in his robe sleeves, then paused before muttering to himself, "You're not going to shackle us and force us to do labor, are you?" Intelligence Officer Beetle chuckled softly and muttered, "Asking church members who have never been productive to work? That would be twice the effort for half the result. You can't operate alchemical machinery or use modern tools, so you probably won't be assigned any work." His tone was clearly filled with undisguised sarcasm, but every word he said was true. Ishmael and Rivera stood there awkwardly, heads bowed, silent. Upon hearing this, the several Inquisition knights accompanying the bishop tightened their grips on their swords, looking as if they were suppressing their anger. But intimidated by the silver magic spears wielded by the black-clad soldiers, none dared to draw their swords easily. Considering that there may still be lizardmen within the city who have managed to escape the bombing and are hiding in the dark ruins, the church's armed forces are temporarily permitted to remain. You may decide among yourselves to gradually eliminate the remaining aliens in various areas of the holy city. We will guard the north and south gates for you, ensuring that no enemy escapes. It sounded like a caged dogfight. This was likely the main purpose of the St. Valen people, to confine the church's remaining forces within the ruins of the holy city, to continuously fight the scattered enemies that roamed the city. While the two sides were at odds with each other, they could also serve as a gatekeeper, constantly monitoring the movements deep within the Saints' Gap, preventing the lizardmen from breaking through the blockade and making a comeback. Don't worry about the winged ones roaming nearby. Reconnaissance airships in the kingdom's western theater will conduct regular patrols, and the entire area surrounding the holy city will be under air traffic control. The underlying meaning of these words was clear. The airships weren't just for monitoring aliens. If they detected any unusual activity among the remnants of the church within the holy city, those terrifying alchemical weapons wouldn't hesitate to launch another artillery purge upon the ruins of Goris. Ismail closed his eyes, pulled a small golden seal from his bosom, and without even glancing at the detailed terms of the agreement, he stamped the cardinal seal directly on the signature area. "We need food, basic medicines, and firewood for heating. There are many young infants among the faithful. Could Could we trade the horses of the Inquisition Knights for some dairy cattle and sheep? Farrell nodded and smiled. It's a perfectly reasonable request. We'll also provide some tents to shelter you from the wind and rain for your temporary use. The city shouldn't be short of building materials. If you have any additional requests, just send someone to the gates and inform our station sentries. According to the agreement, the Northern Army would not enter the Holy City. While the sentries guarding the north and south gates were few in number, their duties were clearly more like those of jailers. Ismail, unwilling to say anything further, bowed slightly, touched his chest, and led the Inquisition Knights into the city. Following closely behind, the faithful, under the command of the Northern Army soldiers, formed a long, crowded line and slowly, anxiously, made their way towards the city. Crossing the shattered main streets of the city, they soon arrived at the edge of the ruins of the Grace Cathedral, which had collapsed into a deep pit. Ismail walked heavily to the rubble, touching a fragment of a bronze bell the size of a door. This was the dawn bell that once hung high atop the church, chiming precisely at sunrise each day. Looking around, the square in front of the Grace Cathedral was riddled with potholes, and faint traces of blood could be seen in the cracks of the broken stone pavement. The Divine Punishment faction must have recently used the church as a base, gathering a large number of troops and believers to defend it. They did keep their promise and were ready to sacrifice themselves to live and die with the Holy City. In accordance with the last instructions of His Holiness the Pope, our top priority now is to re-elect a third cardinal and select the Grand Master of the Order of Glory as the new presiding judge to lead the remaining forces to maintain order and ensure the safety of believers. Ismail took a deep breath and seemed to have regained his spirits. He was not at all affected by being forced to sign a humiliating prisoner agreement. Now we can only rely on ourselves to fight against the remnants of the alien races still wreaking havoc in the city, and purify the holy city that has been defiled by the alien races bit by bit. Although Goris was destroyed in the war, the Cathedral of Grace, which represents our devout faith and unyielding will never collapse in our hearts. He paused, looking at Rivera, who also had a complicated expression, and said, "This must be the final test given to us by God. I hope you will hold on to your faith and continue the last flame of the Holy See with me." The high-ranking knights surrounding him knelt on one knee and swore allegiance to the cardinal who was temporarily acting as the pope. Then they closed their eyes and bowed their heads and prayed loudly. Ismail and Rivera exchanged a glance, but chose not to join them in praying to the gods. From time to time, a low humming sound could be heard from the distant sky. It was the sound of the St. Valen people's magical airships patrolling overhead. As always, the ethereal gods never answered a believer's prayers. From now on, they would have to rely on themselves. Chapter 630, Clearing Out the Remnants. In the dense forests of the hills over 30 miles from the holy city of Goris, a winged lizardman suddenly broke through the dense canopy and soared into the sky. Almost instantly, a bullet blasted from below, piercing its chest and abdomen. A cloud of blood erupted in the air, and the creature that had just escaped death slammed to the ground. Damo Frankie blew triumphantly into the smoking muzzle, brushing aside the brush before him and slowly approaching the shattered corpse of the alien monster. "Frankie, your marksmanship seems to be much more refined than it was back in Black Rock City." Raphael, a fellow mage on guard nearby, rushed over, smiling in praise at his companion's recent success. Frankie curled his lips and snorted complacently, "We have an almost unlimited supply of mana bullets. Improving our marksmanship quickly isn't that difficult." Raphael nodded and sighed. "If we had such abundant ammunition supplies back in the Demon Moon Mountains, our advance wouldn't have been so difficult." Back in Black Rock City, even the scout mages, deployed in small groups deep behind enemy lines, were issued only 50 mana bullets per operation. They fired with the utmost care, aiming for a perfect hit, fighting with meticulous precision. Only after they joined the Northern Army under the orders of Chapter Commander Andre Weiss and Chief Gallagher did they truly experience the true nature of abundant warfare. The rapidly spinning barrels of monomachine guns, the dense hail of bullets that poured down upon the enemy like water, the collective blasts of artillery fire from the bombardment positions every half-minute, and the beam anti-aircraft weapons mounted on the battle airships. Not to mention much else, just the new mono rifles they were issued, with their massive magazines capable of holding 25 rounds and their uninterrupted, high-speed bursts, made the guns of annihilation that once cherished like treasures seem like a firewood stick of inferior quality and inefficiency in comparison. The two chatted for a moment longer, waiting for the surrounding mage squads to converge and reunite. They pulled out a simplified survey map, determined their location, and marked an area marked by cross-cutting lines. We've almost cleared this hill. Everyone, take stock of your gains. Let's return to camp before dark, deploy your formation and repeat the search. There may be some non-winged ones still escaping. Don't miss any water sources. They need to soak in water periodically to keep their anti-magic shells active. This crucial combat intelligence was first discovered by the new Union research team in the Spark City capital. It was quickly verified by the Northern Army General Staff and disseminated to various combat systems on the front lines, allowing soldiers and mages involved in the actual battle to better understand the enemy's ethnic characteristics. Whether for winged ones or ordinary lizardmen, Blackwater weapons are consumable resources. If they are found to no longer readily release their condensed Blackwater weapons during battle, it means their ammunition is running out, and they can only rely on the last condensed black crystal weapons to fight a desperate battle. The release of red light energy is also not unlimited. In this respect, it is similar to the magic energy stored in a spellcaster's body. Although it cannot be replenished by external forces such as magic stones, it still requires a long period of time to recover after multiple releases. This also meant that the winged ones, depleted of their red light energy, were essentially just flying creatures with an extra pair of wings. Any attack piercing their protective skin, exposing their tender inner flesh, would inflict immediate and fatal damage without exception. Perhaps due to their origins in the Earthsea abyss, their naturally strong, magic-resistant skin, a key element in spellcasters' survival, also required periodic immersion in water. Otherwise, the once flexible skin of the lizardmen, who fought on land for extended periods, would dry out and stiffen over time, severely hampering their mobility. Consequently, in the mountains and forests near the holy city of Goris, special forces teams and battle mages tasked with clearing out fleeing enemies often needed only to search for water sources or simply wait by rivers and streams, only to encounter numerous roaming alien fleeing soldiers. The faint sound of gunfire echoed from the distant forests, startling many birds perched in the treetops and sending them soaring into the air, instantly catching their attention. Frankie tilted his head, raised an eyebrow, and said, "It can't be another mage team. Dealing with a few slippery creatures wouldn't cause such a commotion. Probably those bloodline warriors again. Their bolters unleash a powerful barrage, and sometimes they even engage the enemy in close combat, like a pack of hyenas toying with their prey." Raphael curled his lips, clearly disdainful of their behavior. Bloodline warriors, as squires of spellcasters, used to serve as vassals of battle mages, participating in direct battles against demons. There was a distinct difference in status between the two, and most spellcasters rarely treated them as equals. However, these bloodline warriors from the north were clearly different. Rumor has it that they were transformed through ceremonies personally presided over by the emperor. Each one was a powerful being with a high-level bloodline, and their number was surprisingly close to 1,000. Just thinking about the sheer number of rare and expensive ritual transformation materials required to transform such a massive force of extraordinary warriors was enough to fill the Federation's spellcasters with dread. Even some of the leading spellcasters in the magical capital of Alair, or the ancient wizard families behind the High Wizard Council, couldn't afford the costs of transformation and cultivation. What most irritated Frankie and the others was the utter arrogance of these bloodline warriors, who treated them, the combat spellcasters, as mere auxiliary personnel, offering to undertake the more challenging exploration missions in the campaign to eliminate the remaining aliens. This was sheer disregard for them. "Let's return to camp later and quickly move on to the next search area before it's completely dark," Raphael offered, frowning. Before the operation began, he and Frankie, unable to bear the bloodline warriors' deliberate or unintentional provocations, had agreed to a private bet to compete with them in kill counts. 2 or 3 days had already passed, and every day when they returned to camp to check their numbers, they always came up short, a truly embarrassing sight. "Captain, there are some in their ranks who have awakened their tracking and night vision talents. If we really have to operate at night, we'll be at a disadvantage." Although many of the battle mages had undergone demonic transformations, their physical strength was still far inferior to that of the tougher bloodline warriors, and after a long day of fighting, they inevitably felt tired. "What are you afraid of? Commander Andre's mage squad is also nearby. Let's move closer to them and join forces." While battle mages might be inferior to bloodline warriors versed in a variety of magical weaponry against the lizardmen, who are naturally resistant to spellcasters, their mastery of magic and extensive combat experience are real skills, and they aren't necessarily inferior. "Everyone, brace yourself. Unleash your detection and tracking spells. Don't forget, We don't fight solely with our magic guns. Let those arrogant snouts see how spellcasters fight with their brains and wits. Chapter 631 The Secret of Fusion. In Spark City in the northern borderlands, a magic laboratory nestled beneath the royal palace. Reiner and Asdalen stood guard at the entrance to the hall, repeatedly blocking high-ranking officials who came to inquire about the situation. How long has your majesty been in the laboratory? Why hasn't he emerged yet? Fusing the magic core should be dangerous, so why has your majesty demanded the area be cleared, refusing even the bloodline warriors of the royal guard to remain? At least let the two legendary chiefs assist. Like towering metal statues, the two alchemical creatures stood silently before the heavy steel doors of the laboratory, their impassive demeanor leaving everyone helpless. Dawson and Salas exchanged a glance, then waved their hands in reassurance. Everyone, go sit in the hall and wait. When it comes to pure magical application theory, and research in the realm of the soul, we're far less influential than His Majesty Harvey. Arturo, who had hurried over, nodded in agreement. The chief is right. As the founder of the Soul Casting School, His Majesty's knowledge of magic and spiritual energy far surpasses ours. Moreover, with the experience of their previous successful fusion, there shouldn't be any major problems. Although most of the spellcasters present were high-level, they were unfamiliar with this new discipline of soul casting. After hearing the triple reassurances from the legendary chief and the Dean of Science, they temporarily put aside their concerns and returned to the upper hall to wait. The remaining officials, of ordinary background, knew nothing about magic at all. They could only grit their teeth and repeatedly question their fellow spellcasters, their worry palpable. They were clearly more afraid of Harvey's misfortune than the high-level spellcasters present. Little did he know that Harvey, alone in the laboratory, fusing the church's magical core, was caught in a frustrating tug-of-war. As early as when he received the core fragment, he had learned from Pope Calvin that it was a fragment of inheritance known as rebirth. The power of rules it possessed was the foundation of the church's numerous high-level healing spells. The transformation of the church's powerful demon slayers and holy guards, upon whom it relied, was entirely dependent on the properties of this fragment. From these facts, Harvey could easily deduce that the core fragment found in the ruins of the Divine Spine Mountains possessed the power of communication and control. The core itself, like the queen bee of a giant beehive, controlled all surrounding alchemical creations with soul-like qualities and communicated seamlessly with them. Harvey encountered few difficulties or obstacles when fusing the control core. Thanks to the unique properties of his own magic patterns and spiritual anchor, the core fragment was completely suppressed with almost no resistance, and the entire devouring process proceeded with remarkable smoothness. But the newly acquired fragment of rebirth was a stark contrast. If the control core possessed advanced intelligence, independent consciousness, and unimpeded communication with Harvey, then rebirth seemed like an artificial retard, driven only by primitive instincts, operating solely on inertia. Harvey exhausted every avenue he could think of, but found communication impossible. After a long struggle, he finally gave up and attempted to forcibly fuse and devour it. However, he discovered that the core's inherent power of laws was so immense that even though Harvey pushed his mental strength to the limit, the fusion speed could not keep up with the core's regeneration after its destruction. It was like a living tumor, endlessly proliferating. Harvey hovered in the virtual space created by the magic core. On the boundless parallel scroll beneath his feet, countless metal particles, constantly shifting and changing shapes, moved at a constant speed, controlled by his thoughts. They coalesced into numerous silver rings of varying sizes, layer upon layer, surrounding Harvey in the center, like an asteroid belt orbiting a star. Each of these tens of millions of tiny particles represented the alchemical creations and energy-absorbing beetles surrounding Harvey in the real world. The projections in the virtual space also enabled Harvey's consciousness to freely travel into any body, synchronizing with its soul-level consciousness. He had previously utilized this same power of rules to transform the energy-absorbing beetles into tiny alchemical beasts, creating a massive swarm of warbugs that achieved a surprising victory at the Battle of Great Bear Lake and dealt a targeted and fatal blow to the demon lizardman. Unfortunately, this powerful and terrifying power of rules could not be applied to the rebirth, also a core fragment. No matter how many times he forced the rebirth core to shatter, swiftly manipulating its mental tentacles to fuse deeply, this crimson spindle crystal, seemingly identical to control, would always reassemble at a speed even faster than he could. The missing parts, previously devoured by Harvey, would instantly multiply and grow to complete the core. Harvey couldn't help but recall the knowledge he'd gained from the control core. Each core possesses a portion of the origin of the laws, and the origin is the law. Destined from the moment of division, fusion is the inevitable outcome. If mutual attraction and fusion are inevitable, why would rebirth refuse to merge with me, having already devoured control? Is the order of fusion between different inheritance fragments fixed and unchangeable? This thought wasn't entirely unreasonable. According to Pope Calvin, after the human race stole the inheritance core from the demon lizardmen, they shattered it into 12 pieces. Each core fragment possessed its own unique laws and inherently tended to eventually fuse. This suggests that perhaps the aggregation isn't completely chaotic and disordered. Just like numbers, they must be arranged in a predetermined sequence. The order cannot be reversed, nor can it be skipped. So, it seems that the newborn fragments, which haven't yet developed higher consciousness and are unable to communicate, should be ranked lower in the fusion sequence, while the more easily dealt with control should be ranked higher. At this thought, a terrifying thought suddenly flashed through Harvey's mind. Back then, when he devoured the control core, it had claimed that it shared a portion of its origin. That was the reason for the changes in Harvey's magic pattern and the strange soul beach that appeared within his planet-sized spiritual anchor. Harvey had previously believed that this was due to the unique characteristics of the time traveler's soul. It wasn't until he encountered the magic core and communicated with it that he realized it was also a manifestation of the law-based power within the origin. But where did this origin, unique to Harvey, come from? The fragments of the inheritance, split into 12 pieces, were originally given to 12 human tribal leaders who migrated to the southern continent, where they were passed down and preserved in secret from generation to generation. Harvey, born into a small landowner family after his time travel, couldn't possibly have a prominent family background that could trace its roots back to ancient times. For now, we can only take things one step at a time. At least we have the newborn core. Although we haven't been able to successfully fuse it, but by continuing to search for more lost fragments of the inheritance, we can eventually uncover the ultimate truth. Chapter 632 Visitors from the Sea. This is the specific situation. Harvey looked at the kingdom's higher-ranking spellcasters present and spread his hands helplessly. The power of the rules contained in this new fragment is both rigid and powerful. I simply cannot successfully integrate it. Dawson was stunned for a moment before regaining his composure and slowly said, "Since your majesty already possesses a core that is suspected to be called control, you should be able to successfully devour the newborn, which is of a significantly lower sequence and lacks high-level consciousness." This putting the cart before the horse. I find it incomprehensible. Sarath pondered for a moment and slowly said, "I agree with your majesty's analysis. The fusion of inheritance fragments must be carried out according to the established sequence. This is itself a manifestation of the rules." Then, with a serious expression, he suggested to Harvey, "Your Majesty, I believe that the power of the rules brought by the inheritance fragment not only strengthens the caster himself, but the knowledge contained within can also be directly applied in reality, providing irreplaceable support for the growth of the entire race's strength. Therefore, I believe there is no need to risk forced fusion. As long as the fragment remains in our hands, we can always find a way to maximize its effectiveness." Although Harvey himself did not say it explicitly, he listened to the entire conversation between him and his teacher Calvin in the magic network and remembered it vividly. The inheritance core with the power of rules is not something that humans can easily control. Blindly swallowing will cause mutations in one's own magic patterns. The deeper the fusion, the more fragments swallowed. It will lead to infinite expansion of the spiritual anchor, once it reaches the limit that an individual can bear. Therefore, his words were both explicitly and implicitly comforting Harvey, telling him not to rush into the risky act of fusion and swallowing. As the supreme ruler of the United Kingdom and the spiritual leader of their group of spellcasters, it is obviously more in line with everyone's interests and expectations to act cautiously and protect himself. Harvey nodded. "This matter really cannot be rushed. I plan to issue the bounty to all forum members as an agent of the Magic Network Forum. Try to collect records and documents related to inheritance fragments from ancient times, and find ways to find traces of the remaining lost fragments from the clues left over from history. The Magic Network Encyclopedia has included all the documents and tomes stored in the Elam Magic Treasury. Dawson and I will be responsible for screening and searching them as soon as possible to see if we can find any valuable information." The legendary wizard volunteered to serve as the clerk, and the other spellcasters naturally did not dare to be idle. Duncan quickly stood up and said, I will contact the independent spellcasters in Black Rock City through the forum to see if they have some information. I am responsible for contacting the cave dwarves and high elves through the forum. They may have more complete records of ancient documents. Magic Shield followed up and touched his chest. Compared to the humans, who frequently engaged in internal warfare, the dwarves and elves have enjoyed a long period of internal peace since their migration to the southern border. Their historical heritage has remained largely intact, and records of most major events from ancient times are relatively complete. After a moment's reflection, Azdarin suggested, although the holy city of Gauris was destroyed by war, the remnants of the moderates who returned to garrison there likely carried with them many precious tome-like texts. Having them copy some of these would also facilitate verification of the authenticity of much of the information. As for the High Wizards Council, this is the most closed and conservative spellcasting organization in the southern continent's magical world. Most of its members are incredibly stubborn and old-fashioned, and the family relationships and conflicts of interest behind them are even more complex. Harvey had no intention of extending an olive branch to them now, preferring to wait until he had the opportunity to deal with them. I'd like to hand over the research on the core fragments of Rebirth directly to Egno's research team. The Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Agriculture must fully cooperate. If necessary, the new Federation and the Academy of Sciences will also provide timely support. Before Harvey finished his order, a personal guard hurried in from outside the conference room, bowed, and reported to him, Your Majesty, the joint delegation composed of members of the Coral Sea Clan and the Abyss Sea Clan in the Southern Waters, has now arrived at Grizzly Castle by water. Chief Executive Earl Figan asks you whether to allow them to enter the royal capital as a diplomatic mission. Oh? They're here so soon? Harvey raised his eyebrows. They seem to be very concerned about their identities. I clearly asked Dean Arturo to invite them to visit the North in a private capacity, but I didn't expect them to act so formally. A low laugh emanated from Arturo's metal chest, and he slowly explained to Harvey, Your Majesty, this is how the sea people are. They like to imitate human etiquette and norms, and they claim to have an independent cultural heritage, but as long as you can gain their trust, most of the time they are easy to get along with. I heard that although the sea people are weak, most of them are good at singing and dancing, and they are talented in architecture, sculpture, music, painting, and cultural relics appreciation. Almost everyone is a natural artist, especially architecture and sculpture, Arturo replied with a smile. If your majesty has the opportunity to visit their holy city of Coral, you will surely be amazed by their unparalleled aesthetics and superb skills. It doesn't sound like a complete embroidered pillow. Harvey had originally intended to keep them in Spark City as much as possible. He had planned to use these distinguished guests from the sea in the future. Have Minister of Culture and Propaganda Ash be in charge of receiving them. Treat these distinguished guests who have come all the way to the north well, do our best to meet their needs, and keep them here for a while. In the Southern Territory, Grizzly Castle, in the Chief Minister's office at the City Hall, Earl Figan put down his alchemical communicator, turned around, and a smile spread across his face. Suppressing his discomfort, he spoke gently to the two strange-looking distinguished guests. The royal capital has approved your visit and granted you permission to enter Spark City as a diplomatic mission. He had heard rumors about the Sea Tribe before, knowing that despite their strange appearances, they were still a subhuman race sharing the same bloodline. But when he actually met them face to face, he still felt a little terrified. The leader, who claimed to be the Coral Sea Tribe, had a roughly human build, but his face was flat, his eyes bulged, and his cheeks were adorned with protruding gills. He was barefoot, and the web structure between his toes was completely different from that of a normal person. As for the one who claimed to be the leader of the Abyssal Sea Clan, Count Figan himself didn't dare to look at him directly. His upper body looked no different from those of the Coral Clan, but beneath his silken skirt, he was revealed to be several huge, thick tentacles, as slippery as an octopus, leaving a trail of disgusting, wet slime on the floor as he walked. Count Figan swallowed quietly, glanced up at the clock on the wall, and offered a kindly suggestion. It's getting late. Even if you leave for Jackdaw Town immediately, you probably won't be able to catch the last passenger train through the Sacred Spine Mountains. I specifically request His Majesty's permission to have Grizzly Castle allocate 2 transport airships to take you there. Regardless, he had to get them to the capital today, leaving the seafood in Grizzly Castle. He felt like he'd be haunted by nightmares. Chapter 633 Aesthetic Differences. The landing pad is cleared. Cleared for landing. Repeat. Cleared for landing, the airship, carrying a massive airbag, circled rapidly in the sky several times before, guided by flags from ground personnel, it slowly descended onto the empty landing pad. The hatch opened wide, and 7 or 8 visitors, adorned with fancy clothes but strange appearances, stumbled out. They immediately attracted the attention of the surrounding crowd, who let out gasps of surprise and whispers of astonishment from the gathered crowd. "Oh my god, who are they? High elves from the east, no way. I've seen those elven students studying abroad in the royal capital, they don't look like this, look. Some of them have octopus-like tentacles growing from their lower bodies, it's horrible, shut up. Didn't you see they were riding on an official airship? They must be visiting alien allies, don't be so rude. Ah. It's Minister Ash from the Ministry of Culture. He is in charge of receiving these strange visitors." Ash had extremely exquisitely trimmed blonde hair, and wore a neatly ironed dark blue official uniform. He walked forward quickly with a smile on his face. "Mr. Zaka, Mr. Upton, on behalf of His Majesty the Emperor and the United Kingdom, I welcome the 2 diplomatic missions from the Sea Clan to Spark City." As a descendant of the Lambert family, Ash had visited the Holy Coral City with his father Arturo many times in the past. In the eyes of both the Coral Sea Clan and the Abyss Sea Clan, he could barely be considered a familiar face with whom he had a good relationship. The Sea Tribe breathed a sigh of relief when they saw him greet them. Most of them were new to land, having traveled thousands of miles to the depths of the continent. They had just experienced a once-in-a-lifetime high-altitude flight. Their hearts nearly leaped from their throats, their steps unsteady, their legs weak. They fought to keep from vomiting in front of the crowd. Zaka and Upton exchanged a glance, their tense expressions relaxing. "Mr. Lambert, long time no see. We are honored to have been invited to the north by Chief Arturo." Ash waved his hand, interrupting their long-winded pleasantries. "You're welcome. Follow me into the city. We've all had a rough ride. Let's at least get some rest at our inn. We can discuss further." Several open-top alchemy wheel vehicles rumbled up and stopped beside the landing field. The sea creatures were somewhat bewildered, but they did their best to maintain their composure, trying not to appear inexperienced. They clambered into the vehicle Ash had sent, sitting stiffly in the seats, motionless. But as the vehicle began to move, several of the Abyssal Sea Clan members could no longer endure it, retching painfully. Their tentacles flailing uncontrollably, frightening the driver, sweating profusely. Without looking away, they slammed the accelerator to the floor, eager to complete the transport mission immediately. Upton turned to Ash with an embarrassed look and apologized. "Mr. Lambert, I'm so sorry. We just experienced an airship ride we've never seen before, and now we're riding on this strange alchemical carriage." Zaka leaned close to Ash's ear and asked in a low voice, "In our reply to Chief Arturo, we mentioned asking him to help us mediate and purchase ironclad ships and magic weapons from His Majesty the Emperor. I wonder." Ash's eyes rolled, and he immediately remembered the task Harvey gave him. He said mysteriously, "This kind of big deal is not something a small department official like me can find out the details of. Since you are allowed to enter, it at least shows that His Majesty is not opposed to contacting the sea people. And the help of the Abyssal Sea map to the military plan, I think there is definitely a chance." Zaka and Upton were overjoyed when they heard this, and asked repeatedly, "When can we meet His Majesty the Emperor? This time we came with enough treasure special to the Coral Sea. Whether it's crystallized coral or aquamarine, we will definitely not let His Majesty down. There is no need to rush. His Majesty is too busy with government affairs to have time to receive diplomatic missions at any time. You must be patient and stay in the royal capital for a while, visit various government departments and establish good relationships with them to ensure that this business is foolproof." The sea people have always been well aware of the power struggles and intrigues among human nobles. They also know that the rumored emperor is not easy to meet. They immediately cheered up and assured, "This time we come to the north, we are prepared for a protracted war. It doesn't matter how long we stay. As long as we can get His Majesty the Emperor to give in, it doesn't matter even if the price of the ironclad ship doubles." The sea fish has taken the bait. Ash was delighted. Sitting in the wheeled vehicle speeding along the flat road, he pointed at the city scenery along the way and changed the subject. "This is your first time in Spark City. What do you think of the northern capital of the United Kingdom?" Zaka and Upton, who had put down a heavy stone in their hearts, looked around and commented objectively, "We have landed in Pharos, the kingdom of 1,000 sails. We have never seen such a magnificent city along the way. not to mention those giant towers soaring into the clouds. It can be called a miracle. Ash was beaming with joy at this sincere compliment. He felt proud and complacent, and said with a smile, "How about compared to the Holy Coral City?" The two leaders of the delegation were immediately stunned with embarrassment. Before they could find the right words, the young sea creature sitting in the back seat couldn't help but speak. Although the Coral Holy City cannot be compared with Spark City in scale, in terms of architectural skills and beautiful decoration, no capital city of any country in the southern continent can surpass it. Yes, you seem to be extremely pursuing the uniformity of architectural forms. Even the roads must be built neatly. There are also rows of grey houses along the way. They are almost carved out of the same mold. There is no beauty at all. It's not that the buildings are built high enough and the city is built big enough that it can be called beautiful. Seeing that Ash's face was about to fall, Zack and Upton quickly turned around and used their eyes to stop the arrogant words of the younger generation of the tribe, and apologized. These young people have not seen the world of the southern countries, so they are so rude. Mr. Lambert, please don't mind. Ash raised his hand to straighten his collar, chuckled and said, "It doesn't matter. This is the aesthetic difference that has always existed between our two tribes. Since you will be staying in the capital for a long time, I can accompany you to visit many completed buildings, as well as the Kingdom Theater that I am in charge of. A new play will be performed in a few days. It's a good opportunity for you all to come and observe and give us some constructive suggestions. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels." Chapter 634 Fishing. Ash led Zack and Upton, followed by several young sea creatures. As they stepped onto the third floor, they saw a middle-aged man in a black gentleman's suit stand up from the dining table and bow to them gracefully. "Ah, Minister Elliot, I'm so sorry to have kept you waiting." Ash approached him with a familiar embrace, then turned and introduced, "This is the Sea Tribe ally from the southern waters I mentioned to you. This is Mr. Elliot, Deputy Minister of Commerce, in charge of import and export." He paused, winked at Zack and the others, and said teasingly, "Of course, Minister Elliot is not only an expert in trade. He was also a renowned and foremost antique connoisseur in St. Valen, and his family has a rich private collection." Elliot, with the elegance of a southern noble, showed no disdain or fear towards the strange-looking Sea Tribe visitors. He repeatedly invited everyone to take a seat and said with a smile, "Minister Lambert, you're too kind. When the plague broke out and our family fled, if it weren't for His Majesty's favor, even our family's lives would have been in danger. How could we have the opportunity to sit here and chat about collecting and appreciation with you all?" Turning to look at the sea folk visitors, he saw that, as the rumors had suggested, they favored elaborate silk attire, their every gesture mimicking the reserved demeanor of human nobles. He couldn't help but feel a subtle amusement. "I've long heard that our sea folk allies are exceptionally gifted in the arts. With Minister Lambert's introduction today, we must have a good chat. How about a private, free-flowing social gathering?" Ash raised his glass, gently swirling the clear wine within, and smiled in affirmation. The waiters then brought out plates of exquisitely prepared delicacies, and everyone tacitly began to eat. Most of the sea folk delegation had never set foot in the southern interior before, and these intricate terrestrial foods were completely unfamiliar to them. The novel flavors and textures left them speechless. Though they managed to maintain their composure, the speed with which the plates were cleared made it difficult to conceal their delight in the food. During the banquet, Ash and Elliot, as the hosts, frequently toasted and brought up several elegant topics related to drama and painting, which immediately attracted several young people from the Sea Tribe to join in the discussion. This immediately brought the two sides closer together, and everyone had a sincere and happy smile on their faces. Zack suddenly felt a gentle tug on his ankle by a flexible tentacle. He immediately came to his senses, put down his wineglass, coughed lightly, and said to Elliot, "Mr. Minister, I heard that the Kingdom's Ministry of Commerce has been exporting cargo ironclad ships to the major chambers of commerce in the southern border. I wonder what conditions are required to obtain permission to purchase ships." Elliot raised an eyebrow slightly, gave Ash a meaningful look, and pondered for a moment. "Excuse me, but ironclad ships are not something you can simply purchase with money. Those southern chambers of commerce you mentioned are all shareholders of the Spark United Import and Export Company, partners handpicked by His Majesty." Upon hearing this, Upton's several tentacles slid, and he immediately stood up and said, "Then, I wonder if we could have the honor of becoming what you call shareholders, and obtain His Majesty's approval to purchase a few ironclad ships, ahem. Well, I can't say for sure. If it's just ordinary export goods, maybe I can think of a way for you. Ironclad ships are an important strategic resource for the kingdom. Without layers of approval and the final approval of His Majesty, we wouldn't dare sell even a deck abroad." Seeing that things had come to this point, Ash also spoke up. "Zaka and Mr. Upton have had a close relationship with my family in the past. Their invitation to come on this diplomatic mission was also facilitated by my father. Minister Elliot, can you try your best to help mediate?" Zaka immediately winked at the young tribesman, who immediately took out an exquisitely shaped coral gift box from the backpack behind him, opened it to reveal a box filled with various aquamarines, and gently pushed it in front of Elliot. "How can we successfully obtain His Majesty's approval? Minister, please help us think of a solution and reveal as much as possible. The Coral Sea Clan and the Abyss Sea Clan will never forget your great help." Although it was clearly a trap for others, Elliot couldn't help but shudder when he saw the box in front of him full of gems. He quickly closed the lid and retreated. He looked around and found that there were no other waiters in the restaurant's private room. He breathed a sigh of relief. Kingdom officials must never accept bribes at will. "You are putting me on the fire." After gulping down the remaining wine in the glass, Elliot looked at Ash again and whispered, "I accidentally learned in the Palace Council. His Majesty once sent the kingdom's navy to the Holy Coral City to help you complete the ancient ritual of dueling in the service of God." "Right." Upton nodded repeatedly. "Yes, His Majesty's reinforcements not only helped us repel the invading group of demonized horn sharks, but also went deep into the sacrificial sea and helped us retrieve the coral sacred stone. It is because of this that our two tribes decided to formally conclude an alliance with the kingdom and have friendly exchanges from then on." Elliot showed an understanding expression, then muttered softly, "I heard. His Majesty is very interested in certain things in the depths of the sacrificial sea. I guess they may be some rare magical materials that are unique to your tribe. You also know, His Majesty is from a noble spellcaster family and has made considerable achievements in the field of magic, precious magical materials." Zaka and Upton were both stunned. Their voices chorused in unison. "The depths of the sacrificial sea are desolate, with no coral reefs growing. Where else could we find magical materials besides the sacred stone?" The two tribes' rituals of worship had lasted for nearly 1,000 years. Warriors of the tribes had risked their lives diving into the depths of the ocean, repeating the ancient tradition of retrieving the sacred stone. They knew the conditions beneath the seabed with uncanny clarity, and it was impossible for them to miss anything. Ash poked the stunned Upton with his hand and whispered, "What you consider worthless might not be so in the eyes of a human spellcaster. Anyway, the news has been revealed to you. Whether or not you can use it as leverage in negotiations with His Majesty is entirely up to you." With such straightforward words, the sea tribe suddenly understood, and expressions of gratitude spread across their faces. "Mr. Lambert. Mr. Elliot. Thank you for your advice. We understand," Zaka said in a trembling voice, suppressing his excitement. "Indeed, things that spellcasters deem valuable are easily overlooked in our daily lives. If we can agree with your country to jointly explore the sacrificial sea area, perhaps we can even win His Majesty's agreement to sell us ironclad ships." Chapter 635 Mountain Offensive. Is that Rilka City? Vaughn lowered his telescope, stood, and gazed with his naked eyes at the Greystone City perched on the cliffside in the distance. Although everyone knew that Yared was a small mountain kingdom, when the Northern Army advanced near its capital, they were still shocked by the ingenious location of this impoverished and remote royal capital. It was built directly on a cliff-top terrace, and in terms of scale, it was even smaller than Grizzly Castle. The city was connected to the outside world by a single steep zigzag road, a narrow path carved along the cliffside. Whether it's based on the aerial mapping of the reconnaissance airship or repeated confirmation with a local guide, there is no way that can be wrong. The city of Rilka really has only one rugged mountain road in and out. It is said that when the first Grand Duke Yared built the city, he borrowed more than 10,000 hard laborers from the church and spent 8 years hollowing out half of the mountain in front of it before making it so easy to defend and difficult to attack. Vaughn is now considered a half-educated man. He curled his lips in thought for a moment before spitting and cursing, "These damn nobles who are wasting people's money and are afraid of death." Wayne took the telescope from him, tiptoed and watched for a moment. "Don't you think the city of Rilka looks a little wrong?" "What's wrong?" Vaughn was stunned. His Majesty was very interested in the population of the capital of Yared. The combat orders he gave them were to try not to injure the people by mistake, and to find a way to gradually migrate them from the barren mountainous areas after capturing the city to fill the gap in industrial and agricultural manpower in Jinhu City and Fingadan City. After all, it's the capital of a country with a population of 5 to 6,000. Even if they get wind of our impending attack and gather all the troops of the surrounding lords and hide away and keep their troops idle, there shouldn't be no caravans and patrolling knights entering and leaving the city, right? With so many people crammed into such a small city, it would take a lot of food and fodder just to feed the people and horses every day. Even if a large amount of supplies are stored in advance for wartime needs, they still need to be continuously replenished from the outside world, otherwise it will be a slow death that is self-destructive. Vaughn nodded, ordered his adjutant to bring a local guide over, and asked in a deep voice, "Have you been to Rilka before?" The guide was a St. Valen from Wangshan County. In the past, when the relations between the two countries were good, he often smuggled some high-quality wild animal furs from near Rilka and sold them to the royal capital, Jinhu City. He was quite familiar with the situation in Yared, and answered honestly when he heard it. Logically speaking, the gates of Rilka open at sunrise every day and close when the sun sets in the evening. There are at least 3 or 4 caravans coming in and out throughout the day, most of which are grain transport teams from the holy city of Goris, or small chambers of commerce on the border of our country, when the situation in neighboring countries is tense, or when there are large groups of bandits roaming nearby. The city guards will choose to keep the city gates open. They would rather send troops down the mountain to intercept the enemy in advance than delay the transportation of supplies in the city. Dave, growing impatient, urged, "Why go to all that trouble? Why not just send a reconnaissance fleet to investigate? Ideally, bring a few bombing airships along, so they can pass by Count Zephyr's palace, and rain down a few high-explosive bombs on him." Vaughn shook his head gravely. This was a completely different battle from fighting within St. Valen. To the people of Arid, the Northern Army was not only an unprovoked invader, but had also destroyed the papal state of Goris, a place of pilgrimage for them. It was hard not to see them as enemies, as most of the city's faithful believed in them. If they simply bombed the capital without any diplomatic means, any subsequent attempts at peaceful reconciliation would be extremely difficult. Why hesitate so much? We can just not send airships to bomb the city. We can just blast open their city gates with a few shots, clear out all the defenders who try to resist, and capture Earl of Westwind alive. Duff took out a cigarette from his arms and put it in his mouth, shrugged indifferently. "His Majesty did order us to gather the people, but if they insist on resisting to the death, we can't let the soldiers waste time in the mountains." "Right," Wayne also echoed sinisterly, "we can outlast them by wasting time. As long as we surround the city tightly, I dare to guarantee, within half a month, those hungry people who lack food will take the initiative to open the city gates, tie the soldiers guarding the city in front of us, and beg us for a few pieces of bread." These two guys, one is reckless and the other is sinister. Fortunately, the night staff officers with a strong sense of justice like Dickinson and Ross and the staff were not present. Otherwise, after hearing what they said, he would have to complain to General Pierce. Capturing the city is indeed easy. The key issue is how to deal with the aftermath, Vaughn patiently explained. The General Staff's plan is to use Rilka as a key military base for monitoring the holy city of Goris. If we massacre civilians and incite public outrage, the administrative officials sent here will have a hard time gaining a foothold, let alone gaining the support of the locals. Although the population of Arid is sparse, the rugged character of its people, shaped by its impoverished landscape, has always been a source of considerable concern for the nobles. The three were caught up in a heated discussion when Ivan, the military staff officer, hurried over. "Commanders, have you decided on a specific battle plan yet?" Dave has always been a little disgusted with these gentle conspirators and grinned. "His Majesty has not given clear instructions on how to act, and your general staff has not given any feasible suggestions. Aren't we discussing it? Why are you rushing us?" Ivan didn't care at all. He laughed and said, "Aren't I just giving you some ideas?" "Oh?" Vaughn raised his eyebrows and asked, "What ideas? Do you already have a perfect plan?" "Well, of course, the intelligence department had already planted several secret agents in Rilka before the army set out, even before you launched the operation against Goris. They have a similar understanding of the current situation in the city, and they just risked their lives to pass on valuable information." The three of them were refreshed when they heard this, and asked in unison, "What information?" Ivan fished out a slip of paper covered in deciphered code from his bosom, holding it up with a wry smile. Count Zephyr has assembled a detachment of nearly 500 divine punishment knights, along with Archbishop Rilke, to mobilize the citizens of the capital to resist the invaders from St. Valen to the death. Haha, once word of the mobilization spread, the city's inhabitants responded en masse, eagerly pledging allegiance to the church. Vaughn's heart skipped a beat, stunned. Then how will your majesty's plan to rally the people and absorb the population be carried out? These diehards won't surrender so easily. Ivan took the match from Dav and set the intelligence slip on fire. He chuckled. It's true that the kingdom needs fresh labor, but compared to these few thousand people, we don't have the time to waste on a bunch of stubborn fools and nobles. He paused, his expression instantly turned cold. When necessary, it is obviously more important to wipe out the remnants of the Holy See's divine punishment sect, quickly stabilize the western border of the kingdom, and capture Rilke to become a new military stronghold. You mean, let the army launch an indiscriminate attack on Rilke? Your Majesty. How should I explain to your Majesty? Ivan raised his hand to adjust his sleeves and said lightly, after all, your Majesty is a benevolent monarch who regards the people as his own children, so we have to do the dirty work. The army does not have to bear the main responsibility for this operation. You can launch a persuasion offensive against Earl Westwind and the people defending the city now. Our people will take other actions in the city. A flash of lightning suddenly flashed through Vaughn's heart, and he suddenly realized it, and said angrily, the Northern Army disdains to play the role of hypocrites in this battle. Since the General Staff has already formulated an action plan, we will also follow the plan. He took a deep breath, turned to Wayne and Dave and ordered, notify the entire army to set off, enter the predetermined attack range, and prepare to siege the city. Chapter 636 Siege. Count Leon Waters of Westwind trudged into the palace courtyard, beckoned a servant, and solemnly ordered, pour me a glass of wine, something strong. The distant chiming of church bells drifted in, startling the kingfishers perched on the courtyard's grape arbor and sending them fluttering into flight. Guards patrolled the corridors in full armor, casting a solemn and menacing atmosphere over the entire Rilke palace. Taking the gold-rimmed goblet from the waiter, Count Westwind eagerly gulped down the entire gulp. The invasion of the St. Valenciennes was imminent, and only a rich, fragrant wine could soothe his restless heart. As he stared lost in thought at his empty wineglass, a knight of the Judgment Army, clad in full steel armor and a pure white cloak, hurried in from outside the courtyard. Gripping his sword's hilt with one hand, he frowned at Count Zephyr and asked, Your Majesty, why don't you go to the cathedral square and encourage the people with the archbishop to maintain peace of mind? Instead, you're hiding in the royal court drinking. Stay calm. Count Zephyr casually tossed his wineglass aside and smiled wryly. The St. Valen airships are constantly patrolling overhead. We never know when an attack from the sky will strike. Your method of maintaining peace of mind is nothing more than distributing holy medicine concocted by the divine punishment sect to the faithful. Intoxicated by the pious faith and the medicine, the entire city's inhabitants will die alongside us. Chief Judge Byrne slammed his sword to the ground, his face sullen. The holy elixir is used to temporarily stimulate the bloodline strength of ordinary believers. This allows them to bravely defend the city against St. Valen's army. Otherwise, how do you think we can hold Rilke? Count Zephyr curled his lips, unwilling to argue. He had secretly administered the holy elixir to several condemned prisoners. While the drug's effects did indeed enhance their strength and invulnerability for a few hours, once it wore off, the recipient would immediately and irreversibly weaken, succumbing to miserable death, akin to accelerated aging, beyond a day's reach. No other medicine could cure this. The divine punishment sect's holy elixir was essentially a poison designed to consume both the victim and the enemy. The holy city was destroyed by the heretics of St. Valen. His Holiness the Pope and several bishops are missing, and Chief Inquisitor Felipe died heroically in battle. Leon Waters, you are feeling timid before the war. Are you trying to betray the honor and power bestowed upon you by the gods? Earl Zephyr waved his hand, staggered to his feet and said, There's no need to humiliate me with provocation. Although the holy city has fallen, the Waters family's duty to protect it remains. Once the St. Valenians begin their attack, I will lead the charge. Before Burns could respond, a city guard knight walked into the courtyard and reported loudly, Your Majesty, the Archduke, the St. Valenian army appeared southeast of the royal capital, less than 10 miles away. Dozens of their magic airships are also heading towards us from the same direction, and they will arrive over the royal capital in as little as a quarter of an hour. Are there any large alchemical weapons among the enemy's ground forces? The knight shook his head in confusion and answered honestly. If it's heavy magic weapons like the alchemical magic-breaking crossbow, they don't seem to be carrying them. There are only more than 2,000 of them, and they are all carrying long pole spears that can shoot magic arrows. Burns was overjoyed, and turned to Count Zephyr and said excitedly, "These heretics must have used up all their long-range magic bombs in the siege of the Holy City. That's why we can only rely solely on magic airships and ordinary soldiers to attack Rilke. We may have a chance to win." Count Zephyr was invigorated and asked, "What chance?" "Let those heretic soldiers into the royal capital, and use the believers and soldiers who have taken the holy medicine to engage in close combat with them. With the help of the rugged terrain and narrow streets of the royal capital, those airships overhead will definitely not dare to drop explosives and accidentally injure friendly forces, using the flesh and blood of believers and soldiers, and engaging in street fighting with the enemy with a numerical advantage several times that of the enemy. It seems to be a good plan." Earl Zephyr hesitated for only a few seconds before nodding his agreement. "It's possible, but my knights of the Royal Guard cannot be sent first." Burns smiled and said, "Don't worry. We have devout believers willing to sacrifice their lives for our Lord and bravely fight at the forefront against heresy." By the time the two men hurried to the wall watchtower, the Royal City Guard was already fully armed and preparing for battle. Dozens of cauldrons of oil were already boiling over, and a large number of rolling stones and battering rams were piled near the battlements. Believers came and went on the stairs, carrying bundles of arrows, systematically transporting them to the wall. According to believers who had managed to escape from the eastern monastery of the Holy City and reached Rilke, the army of St. Valen had used the most terrifying celestial thunder and fire in the Battle of Gorus. It was a magical bomb whose source was impossible to determine, hurtling from the distant sky. Once it struck its target, it would cause a violent explosion and concussion, even more terrifying than the mass bombardment of an elemental mage. In comparison, those magical airships were less formidable. If they flew too close to the ground, the alchemical magic-destroying crossbows mounted on the city walls would threaten their fragile air bladders. Armed with this crucial intelligence, the Divine Punishment Inquisitors who had fled to Rilke were fully prepared. They not only urged Count Zephyr to reactivate the mountainside cavities within the capital, but also erected layers of defensive barriers along the city's streets and alleys. They also expanded the city walls as much as possible, moving catapults and crossbow carts to the top to defend against the enemy. Rilke was an isolated city built on a high mountain platform, making it difficult to defend. With such thorough preparations, and the advantage of attacking from a low point, Burns believed they were not without a fight. "Your Majesty. Lord Judge. The enemy troops have stopped at the foot of the mountain and are holding the ground. They don't seem to be planning a forced attack up the mountain," the knight in charge of observation ran over to report. Burns froze for a moment, then snatched up his monocular and crouched on the parapet, peering down into the distance below the city walls. The St. Valen soldiers, clad in dark uniforms and completely bare of armor, stood in neat formation, showing no sign of advancing. Frustratingly, the enemy seemed to have mastered distance control, their formations perfectly positioned beyond the reach of catapults and crossbows, preventing Rilke, on the defensive, from launching an initial attack. What are they planning? Are they planning a siege, or are they waiting for the airships to strike first? Earl Zephyr looked anxious. Burns said gravely, "Have all the soldiers and believers take refuge in the siege caves, away from the bombardment of the magic airships. No matter what, we must draw them into a fierce, street-to-street battle." He had barely finished his words when, from the distant sky, a series of sharp, breaking wind sounds rang out, like the whistles of a powerfully blown metal whistle. Chapter 637 Precision Bombing. A shrill whistle echoed from the sky, and the next second, a deafening explosion echoed around them. Boom! A thick cloud of black smoke suddenly rose from the broad battlements of the city wall. The violent explosion tore down the arch tower, causing the stone walls to tremble erratically. Earl Zephyr, surrounded by his guards, fell to the ground. When he staggered to his feet, the cold sweat on his back had soaked through the lining of his armor. The St. Valen people also have heavenly fire and thunder punishments that can be used for sieges. How many of these horrible things have they made? Burns also stumbled to his feet, holding the hilt of the sword with one hand, his expression gloomy. Even if they still have this trick, the thunder and fire are coming from the mountains and forests several miles away, and they are hitting us like headless flies. We just need to let the soldiers and believers hide in the hiding caves, and wait until their weapons are exhausted, and then lure the ground troops into the city." Before he finished speaking, a terrifying scream came from the sky again, and the city wall became the predetermined target of attack again. The battlements made of stone slabs could not bear the burden under the bombardment of artillery fire, and a section of the wall about several feet long collapsed directly, like a wound on the edge of a porcelain bowl that suddenly cracked. "Retreat! Retreat! All soldiers abandon the city walls and retreat into the city's hidden caves. Pass the order. Wait until the enemy enters before launching a counterattack, Your Majesty. The enemy troops outside the city are beginning to close in on us. Why not try to strike back with catapults and crossbows?" Earl Westwind, huddled within the wall of guards surrounding the city, scurried toward the city walls, angrily shouting, "No! Abandon the city walls and let them in. Staying here will only make us targets for those magical lightning and fire." Soon, under the relentless shouts of the royal guards, the once heavily guarded outer walls of the city were emptied. Large numbers of soldiers, accompanied by civilians and believers, retreated from the defensive areas into the city, retreating into the dozens of hidden caves built into the hillside. The judgment army of the Divine Punishment sect galloped through the narrow streets, using thick ropes to pull down wooden sheds and buildings, and using broken wood and rubble to form layered roadblocks to block the enemy's advance. Because the city of Rilke was built entirely on a clifftop terrace, the main part of the city was divided into two parts by the terrain's elevation. The soldier cave, located on the higher slope, had always been a crucial storage area for the royal family, storing weapons and food, and defending against foreign invasions. It was precisely because of the soldier cave's commanding position and its complex network of internal passageways and war preparations that Rilke was once known as a model of easy defense and difficult attack, known as an isolated mountain fortress that would never fall. Boom! Violent explosions continued overhead, but now within the soldier cave, Earl Westwind felt a sense of peace. Even the most powerful thunder and fire could not penetrate the tens of meters of rocky mountainside and strike the defenders hidden within. Moreover, they had stored a large supply of rolling stones, battering rams, kerosene, and bows and crossbows at the entrance of the soldier cave, equivalent to the city walls. Even if they had underestimated the enemy's thunder and fire weaponry, they would only have prematurely abandoned a wall they had no intention of defending. The Divine Punishment sect's holy medicine had already been distributed among its followers and soldiers. If the St. Valenian heretics dared to invade the city, they could immediately exploit the complex and narrow terrain to defeat them one by one. With their numerical advantage, Burns firmly believed that the soldiers, driven by the holy medicine and the fearless followers, could completely neutralize the enemy's magical weapons. Even spellcasters would eventually run out of mana and fall victim to human wave tactics, and the magical weapons of ordinary mortal soldiers would naturally run out of ammunition. If their plan succeeded, and they successfully eliminated the St. Valenian heretics in Rilke, the exiled church and tens of thousands of believers driven back to the holy city would be emboldened by the victory. Perhaps they could use this opportunity to recapture Goris and drive the enemy out of the Papal States once and for all. Your Majesty, the enemy has blown open the city gates. They're storming the city, Judge. The enemy has divided into 3 groups and is advancing towards the upper city. They're moving slowly, clearing roadblocks along the way. Should we order the soldiers and believers to take the pills and charge them? Burns shook his head and waved to Earl Zephyr. Don't rush. Wait. Wait until they push up from the lower city, then we'll strike them head-on in the church square below. Seeing the enemy approaching, their figures clearly visible through the telescope as they moved through the streets, Earl Zephyr felt a faint sense of unease. A St. Valen force that had arrived first at the church square suddenly stopped. Over 500 men formed a line and crowded the alley at the end of the square. Suddenly, they split into dozens of teams of 2 or 3, removed the strange devices they were carrying, and began to tinker with them. They resembled hollow cylinders, each about the thickness of a thigh. A triangular iron frame stood at the end, and a strange metal support rod slung through the middle of the cylinder, seemingly holding several hollow rings of varying sizes. These seemingly heavy objects, made of cast metal, had been carried by ordinary St. Valen soldiers. Their improvisation and assembly seemed to have taken less than a few minutes. Even after they had inserted a shield-like iron plate into the back of the cylinder, Earl Zephyr and Chief Judge Burns couldn't discern their purpose. But this question only lingered for a moment. Soon, they saw a soldier insert a sharp-tipped iron pin into the cylinder, while another half crouched and fiddled with the hollow rings. Then, dozens of soldiers in separate groups suddenly pulled the lever at the end of the cylinder, and a stream of orange fire, mingled with black smoke, erupted from the mouth of the cylinder. Dozens of nearly indistinguishable black shadows suddenly shot up from below, crashing precisely into the soldiers' hideout on the high slope. The thunderous explosion echoed the lightning and fire that had erupted overhead. How is this possible? What are they carrying? The alchemical devices rumored to unleash lightning and fire attacks don't look anything like this. Neither Earl Zephyr nor Burns had personally seen St. Valen's lightning and fire weapons, but based on scattered descriptions from scouts and the gathered civilians, they could roughly deduce their true nature. Most of them were as massive and heavy as the alchemical quest's dragon flamethrowers and demon-breaking crossbows, requiring carriages to move them and impossibly difficult to control manually. But the fact that these soldiers, each carrying a magical firearm, could unleash an explosion as powerful as lightning and fire was simply unbelievable. Less than half a minute separated the second round of bombardment from the first. Dozens more dark shadows descended, and dazzling fireballs rose from the entrances of several troop caves. Searing blasts of air, swirling with black smoke, overturned catapults, igniting battering rams and oil pans. The pungent smoke and dust sent the soldiers huddled nearby rushing out without a care. We can't wait any longer. Their lightning and fire are more accurate than those from a distance. Every attack is headed straight for the troop caves. If this continues, once the entrances collapse, we'll be buried alive. Burns drew his sword and swung it fiercely, gritting his teeth and commanding, "Have all soldiers and believers consume the holy elixir, and we'll charge them from above." Chapter 638, God's Punishment of the Remnants. In less than a quarter of an hour, the Northern Army, arrayed at the entrance to the cathedral square, unleashed hundreds of shells from their portable artillery, raining down a barrage of fire on the siege caves on the terrace above. Rilke's defenders had initially thought they could retreat to the higher ground, protected by the artificially excavated caverns within the mountain, and from above, they could suppress the enemy with their trebuchets and ballistae. Instead, they were caught in the crossfire of the St. Valenciennes, their strange lightning and fire weapons, making them a prime target. The artillery fire from the square below was relentless, and the explosions near the siege caves were almost incessant. Several soldiers manning the trebuchets, braving the artillery fire, strained to pull the capstans, only to be directly hit by a shell. The violent explosion unleashed a powerful blast, sending the heavy catapult careening upward. The soaring flames engulfed dozens of surrounding defenders. The tightly bundled battering rams a short distance away were also affected, sending shards of splintered wood flying in all directions, piercing the soldiers who couldn't duck. The boulders, weighing over 100 pounds, atop the catapults lost control in an instant, tumbling over several boiling oil pots before rolling into the dense crowd behind them. Mortal flesh was incredibly fragile at this moment, and the crushing boulders left only a glaring scar of blood and flesh on the ground. Many who had managed to escape were slammed head-on into the scattering shards of battering rams, clutching their wounds from the splinters and screaming in agony, waiting for death. The wounded, instantly incapacitated, had no one to attend to them. Numerous soldiers and believers, driven out of the caverns, were overawed by the artillery fire and forced back into the caverns before they could even take the holy elixir distributed by the divine punishment inquisitors. Despite the wrath of the Grand Duke's night guards, they refused to regroup and charge the enemy. Their former superior position now became a clear target for the enemy's precise strikes, and the entrance to the caverns was engulfed in flames. Count Zephyr lost the courage to oversee the battle from the platform and, surrounded by his guards, retreated back into the caverns. The thunder and fire attacks from below did not cease. The shrieking blasts of artillery shells paused for only half a minute before reverberating across the battlefield once more. This time, the enemy seemed to have adjusted their aim. Dozens of shells, like boulders hurled from catapults, slashed into the caverns with unerring precision, following in parabolic arcs. Suddenly, smoke billowed from the bombarded caves, flames billowed, and the roar of explosions and shrill wails echoed in a horrific scene resembling a fiery hell. In the caves unaffected by the bombardment, the civilians who had been forced to hide were the first to collapse. These people, whose faith was not as strong as that of the devout believers, had been forcibly conscripted by the Inquisition and the royal guards. Their courage had completely vanished. Someone, unknown, took the lead, but during the lulls in the bombardment, they screamed and fled along the side passages of the caverns. In the crushing chaos, many were thrown back down the slope, tumbling like gourds onto the square below. Earl Zephyr was completely panicked. He had expected defeat today, but he had never expected such a horrific scene. The planned street battles had not yet begun, and the counterattacks from above had not even begun, when the heavily assembled defenses collapsed. He glanced around in panic, only to find Chief Judge Burns, his eyes bloodshot, sword in hand, hurrying toward him, his face smeared with blood. "Ignore those foolish, cowardly people," the Chief Judge pointed his sword downward, shouting at the top of his lungs. "I have ordered the Knights of the Inquisition and the pious to consume the holy potion and charge with those who have escaped the soldier cave. With them as human shields, the Bloodline Knights hiding in the rear will be able to close in and engage them in close combat. How many troops do we have left? Forget about a plan of dividing our forces. Mobilize all your Royal Guard Knights, have them consume the holy potion, and drive out all the conscripted people. We can't waste any more time here." Count Zephyr was silent for a moment, then gritted his teeth and, with a ferocious expression, ordered his lieutenant beside him, "Have the knights consume the potion. Abandon your horses. Hide behind the fleeing people and charge at those heretics of St. Valen." Soon, the assembled knights and guards followed the surging crowd into the church square. After consuming the holy medicine distributed by the Divine Punishment sect, the eyes of these previously frail soldiers and believers glowed red and bloodshot, veins bulged in their necks, and the conspicuous blood vessels beneath their skin took on a terrifying black-purple hue. Many, under the influence of the drug, even tore their clothes, roaring like wild beasts. The Northern Army, assembled at the entrance to the square, seemed well prepared, having already constructed a simple defensive line of gravel and sandbags. Several bizarrely shaped alchemical chariots were pushed to the front, as if anticipating the shift from offense to defense. Earl Westwind and Burns, hanging at the rear of the column, had no time to discern their enemy's next move. At their instruction, several knights of the Judgment Army ran back and forth, issuing the final charge. "Glory be to you. Kill the enemy." Deprived of the speed advantage afforded by their horses, nearly 1,000 Inquisitors and Royal Guards Knights desperately pushed forward on foot. Many of the civilians pushed forward ignored orders to take their medicine, wailing in fear and retreating in the opposite direction. They were met head-on by the sharp blades of their own spears, instantly piercing their chests. Even before their lifeless bodies fell, they were thrust forward by the weapons. In this moment, they became veritable flesh and blood shields in the hands of the nobles. Covered by billowing smoke and rising flames, their mere foot charge quickly cut the distance between them and the enemy in half. Through the throng of people, they could clearly see the St. Valen soldiers crouching behind their crude shelters over 100 meters away. As a knight of divinely gifted blood, Burns naturally didn't need to take the holy elixir required by others to activate his potential. With a toe, he picked up a spear dropped by someone and tucked it between his ribs. He held his sword in one hand and his spear in the other, roaring out his rage. Suddenly, he saw several black-clad St. Valen soldiers rise to their feet, calmly swinging their arms. A ball of blazing red flame erupted from the front of the strange alchemical weapon, pushed to the front of the formation. Continuous flames, mixed with crackling sounds, sprayed directly towards the charging formation where he was standing. The knights and soldiers at the forefront suddenly erupted in gore, their bodies erupting in blood. Without a sound, they collapsed like wheat cut by a scythe. He heard the sounds of armor breaking and heavy objects falling to the ground, and looked back in panic. Earl of Westwind, who was originally several steps behind him, had several bloody holes exploded in his chest and fell face down to the ground. Chapter 639 Early Work. The hovering battle airships slowly descended into the city of Rilka. Dozens of battle mages emerged from their pods, each with a look of irritation on their faces. Despite arriving first above the battlefield, they were forced to hang in the air, suspended in the air, enjoying their time as observers, by a sudden request from their commander to forbid the bombing. Vaughn, leading a group of officers, also entered the city along the mountain path. They hurried to the church square in the upper city, where the fighting was most intense. Looking up at the towering bell tower, they discovered that the spire, a symbol of the glory of the church, had been ripped off by the intense artillery fire. Only a few crumbling pillars remained, teetering on the edge of the flames. Although airships were not deployed in the battle, Rilka, exposed to the artillery barrage, still suffered destruction. The lower city, previously out of the bombardment's reach, was razed to the ground by the defenders and the Vatican Knights. The shattered remains of many buildings were used to erect roadblocks blocking the streets. The hardest hit area, the upper city, particularly the area surrounding the cliffside shelters, was subjected to a combination of long-range heavy artillery and portable artillery. Despite the relatively concentrated impact, the artillery was inevitably razed to the ground. Against these natural cave shelters, the medium-range, close-range strikes of portable artillery were far more effective than the blinding fire of heavy artillery from miles away. With a simple adjustment of the firing range, the pointed shells would swirl and plummet into the caverns, shucking the enemy inside to death. Furthermore, portable artillery boasted a lightweight design and ease of assembly. It could be used for rapid marches on foot without the need for alchemical vehicles, and its projectile nature allowed it to traverse obstacles and strike targets behind cover, making it an essential weapon in urban street fighting. With the numerous technological improvements at the royal capital's military factories, the most cumbersome magic-powered cannons in the original artillery array had been almost completely recalled and recast. Only a few remained in use as defensive artillery in some cities along the kingdom's southern border. Currently, the northern army's only two main strike forces were long-range heavy artillery and portable artillery. They employed magic-infused solid rounds and dragon flame shrapnel shells, respectively, depending on the battlefield situation. Their flexible rotation could inflict devastating damage on any enemy. But considering the cost of manpower and ammunition to capture a mountain city like this, which offered no inherent resource benefits and was purely strategic, was staggering. Von was well aware of the specific cost of a single magic-infused cannonball. Even with most of the raw materials produced in-house, it still cost nearly 100 gold yuan to ship. This meant that the lightning siege, which had just lasted only 2 hours, had already cost nearly 100,000 gold yuan. Even with Spark City's gold-making machines operating at full capacity, it would take ages to produce a single round. No wonder His Majesty kept telling them that war in the new era was a game of burning money, competing for resources and financial resources. Of course, the issue of military expenditures wasn't his primary concern. The general staff and the logistics department would handle the headache, and the finance department would handle it. As commander of the Western Front, his sole mission was to capture cities for His Majesty and win every battle. He led officers and staff through the streets and alleys, and discovered the main battlefield in the cathedral square. Numerous bodies lay sprawled on the ground. Their faces and skin were a strange purple-red. Even after they had fully expired, their veins still protruded like spiderwebs, a truly chilling sight. This is probably another poison concocted by the Divine Punishment faction. Just like the plague in the old capital, they're treating innocent lives like cannon fodder. Ivan, the military staff officer, observed casually, with the help of soldiers, and couldn't help but curse. Von, however, had an idea and asked his adjutant, how many civilians and captured soldiers managed to survive. The adjutant took out the statistical report that had just been handed to him from his arms and said hesitantly, there are still nearly 3,000 civilians who survived. We have rounded them up and driven them to the hiding cave for unified guarding. The church knights and the subordinates of Earl Westwind, there are less than 500 prisoners. Most of the rest were killed directly during the charge on the square, Wayne said in a deep voice. The soldiers found many strange pills on the civilians. They were probably distributed by the church. Anyone who takes the pills in battle will become extremely powerful in a short period of time, and they will charge towards us fearlessly without fear of pain or death. After torturing several prisoners, we found out that they call this thing a holy medicine. Von nodded and ordered in a deep voice, give the confiscated pills to the military doctors. Minister Egno will definitely be very interested in this. The adjutant was stunned for a moment, then muttered quietly, the medical team just sent someone to inquire about the wounded among the surrendered prisoners. Should they be treated? Von didn't answer, but continued on ahead. Wayne and Ivan turned with strange expressions, glaring at the adjutant as if he were an idiot, frightening the honest adjutant into silence. Many of the new recruits brought from Wongshan County, under the supervision of the veterans, did the dirty work of clearing the battlefield, mechanically raising their bayonets and stabbing each enemy corpse lying on the ground. Dave rushed to meet up with them, exhausted, and complained to his colleagues angrily, among the captured knights, there are several minor nobles. They led us to identify the bodies of Earl Westwind, who was shot to pieces by machine guns, and Burns, the chief judge of the Divine Punishment faction. Humph, these guys think they can gain benefits by surrendering voluntarily, and actually propose to pay ransom and land in exchange for their freedom. The military judge coughed and reminded with a dull expression, according to the laws of the kingdom formulated by His Majesty, Only the nobles of this country have the right to pay ransom to reduce their crimes according to the circumstances. There are currently no corresponding laws and regulations for foreign nobles to refer to. As soon as these words came out, the meaning was very clear. It all depended on Vaughn, the commander, to make the decision independently. There was no need to report to higher levels, and the Ministry of Justice was too lazy to care. Staff Officer Ivan glanced at Vaughn meaningfully and said calmly, "Most of the people in Rilke are devout believers of the Church. The captured noble knights and judges, our absolute supporters of the divine punishment sect. They are very likely to have a lot of the so-called holy medicine on them. Once they are instigated to create chaos, it will be easy to create a lot of trouble when their numbers are greater than ours. Their troops will not stay in Rilke for too long. They will also need to move to the southern part of Yared to clear out the escaped remnants of the divine punishment sect of the Holy See. At the same time, they will have to send troops to monitor the nearly 10,000 Vatican prisoners in the Holy City at all times. If they don't deal with the remaining problems here, it will be difficult to start reconstruction work when the replacement logistics engineers arrive." Vaughn pondered for a moment, then turned to Wayne and casually ordered, "No need to bring those captive nobles to me. Take them, along with the believers, to the soldier cave for unified custody. Tell the medical team not to waste precious medical resources on the captives." This order seemed to offer no solution to Ivan's concern, but Wayne, who always understood his commander, immediately understood. Knowing he had been chosen to clean up the mess, he gave a sinister chuckle and briskly turned away. As night fell, a group of soldiers manning alchemical vehicles suddenly appeared outside the soldier cave. The carts were piled high with jars of black water from the Saurian, captured from the holy city of Goris. This stuff ignites instantly and is extremely difficult to extinguish, making it a terrifying accelerant. Chapter 640 The Emperor's Acquiescence. Your Majesty, this is the Western Frontier War report sent back from Yared. Please review it. Harvey took the copied report from his personal guard and quickly scanned it, finding it primarily concerned the military operations against Rilke City and a post-battle summary. As he had expected, the operation against Yared progressed remarkably smoothly. The Northern Army, deploying only 3 battalions of troops, supported by a 100-man airship squadron, easily captured the neighboring capital in less than a day. To avoid hindering post-war reconstruction efforts, they even forego aerial bombardment of the city with high-explosive bombs, instead employing a limited number of long-range artillery to breach the city gates, leaving portable artillery and machine guns as the primary focus of the battle. Even when forced into close-quarters street fighting within the city, they encountered little effective resistance, leaving Earl Zephyr and the remnants of the Divine Punishment faction completely powerless. The report was written in formal, precise language. Harvey could tell at a glance that the first half was written by Vaughn himself, while the second half was clearly supplemented with details by a military staff officer. However, the content surprised him slightly. "Bring me the strange pill mentioned in the letter." The guard quickly held the wooden box in both hands and respectfully placed it before Harvey. With his fingertips, he lifted the lid and pulled out a black pill the size of a finger. A familiar feeling struck him, and he immediately ordered, "Send Minister of Health and Medicine, Igno, to see me." After waiting for about half an hour, the bustling hybrid elf finally arrived at the palace and rushed into Harvey's office. "Take these pills back and attempt a pharmacological analysis. The battle reports from the front lines mention that after mortals ingest them, they will temporarily stimulate the bloodline power that was previously difficult to awaken, greatly increasing their strength and making them immune to pain. I want to know how the Divine Punishment sect created these, and what the specific formula is." Igno carefully picked up a pill, brought it to his nose and sniffed it, then pondered for a moment and said, "Your Majesty, I can confirm now that this thing is different from the demon race's secret blood summoning potion. At least it does not contain the flesh and blood of any magical creature. Could it be that the Church previously used the characteristics of the new fragments to catalyze it?" Harvey shook his head, himself puzzled. There are indeed some familiar magical fluctuations in the pills, but the new rules are characterized by bridging growth, which does not help to stimulate bloodline abilities. So I suspect the Divine Punishment sect has added other unnatural magical ingredients. He paused, then patiently explained to Igno, "The ingredients in this pill appear to have significant side effects right now. But if we can successfully crack and refine the formula, I believe it could be used on those previously eliminated who underwent the bloodline awakening ritual but ultimately failed, attempting to reactivate their bloodline talents. This way, The number of extraordinary soldiers in the special operations team could be doubled. Egno perked up, quickly picking up the pill box from the table and bowing to Harvey. Understood. I'll arrange for a drug research and development team to analyze the pill's ingredients. After Egno left, as Dallin and Pierce entered the office almost on time, Harvey raised an eyebrow and smiled. Tell me, what do you think of Vaughn and the others' decision in Rilke, Your Majesty? Are you referring to the order to burn the caves holding the defeated and the execution of all the captive nobles and divine punishment believers in Rilke? Pierce asked tentatively, looking somewhat uneasy. Don't worry, I have no intention of holding anyone responsible. You two can just speak freely. Harvey shrugged and waved his hand for the two to sit down and talk in detail. Pierce finally breathed a sigh of relief and explained frankly, although this decision was not made directly by me, after receiving the report afterwards, I believe that Vaughn and the others' decision was correct. The nobles and believers who have completely surrendered to the Holy See's divine punishment sect must be completely wiped out with thundering means. Any remnants will be like rats in the sewer, and we don't know when they will cause us trouble. Harvey touched his chin and teased, Vaughn is worthy of being brought up by you. His style of doing things is also direct and rough. I originally thought that Asdarin would instruct you to send those people to the Holy City and mix them with the moderate believers to jointly implement the Watchdog plan. Asdarin smiled and said, Your Majesty did anticipate my previous plan. The General Staff originally planned to relocate all the remaining Vatican believers and believers in Rilke City to the Holy City. But when our spies learned about the information about the strengthening pills, I changed my mind. This secret enhancement drug secretly controlled by the Divine Punishment sect did not seem to play its due role in this battle. But once the pills were secretly spread out, or even flowed into St. Valen without anyone noticing, and were obtained by the remnants of the radical Vatican lurking throughout the kingdom, it would probably cause unrest in the local area. The municipal officials trained with great effort by the Ministry of State were powerless and could hardly resist a suicide attack in which anyone who took the drug would die together with them. Harvey nodded and said, Yes, I have ordered the Ministry of Health to analyze the ingredients of the medicine, but don't take it lightly. Intelligence departments in all places need to be more vigilant than before and always pay attention to any clues of this enhanced secret medicine. Pierce whispered, Your Majesty, so, you really don't intend to hold Vaughn and others accountable for abusing their power? More than 3,000 prisoners, these are all perfect candidates for hard labor slaves. If it were in Spark City, which was in urgent need of labor in the past, when the city hall learned that the army dared to kill so many surrendered people, even if the emperor himself acquiesced, the population officials under it would tear them to pieces alive. There's nothing wrong with using drastic measures when necessary, Harvey said calmly, waving his hand. It's just that they acted too hastily, leaving no survivors with valuable intelligence for interrogation. Later, when they moved to the surrounding areas to eliminate the remnants of the divine punishment, I'm afraid things won't go as smoothly as they do now, even if they suppress the news. Word of the Northern Army's actions in Rilke City will eventually spread. The Northern Army's unwavering commitment to annihilating the divine punishment faction from top to bottom will inevitably provoke even fiercer resistance from the scattered remnants of the divine punishment. Fortunately, Asdarin was prepared for this. Your Majesty, rest assured. The General Staff and the Intelligence Department have anticipated this situation. Secret police and intelligence personnel have been deployed to neighboring countries in advance. We can deal with these radical remnants of the church in the open, while we remain in the dark. Harvey nodded, brushing this minor concern aside. Inform Ash that I intend to meet with 2 Sea Tribe delegations from the Southern Seas tomorrow afternoon. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 641 Maritime Development Rights. Ash, accompanied by Zakon Upton, rode the alchemical carriage to the Imperial Palace in the heart of the capital. Once the vehicle stopped, he pulled them out and patiently reminded them, let me reiterate, although His Majesty is gentle and approachable most of the time, he particularly dislikes the ways and manners of the southern nobles. When you meet him later, be sure not to be bound by elaborate formalities. Simply be forthright with your requests. Being hesitant will only anger him. Zaka pulled a silk handkerchief from his bosom and wiped the sweat from his forehead, nodding repeatedly. Finally, he pressed, besides this, does His Majesty have any particular dislikes or likes? How can we please him? Ash scratched his head, pondered for a moment, and said blankly, His Majesty is a spellcaster. I can't reveal his past, but it's true that he enjoys some quirky things. He's unlike the more conventional spellcasters. Upton looked a little embarrassed. He took out a coral jewelry box inlaid with the gold wire from the bag on his waist, and said with a wry smile, This was originally a gift intended for His Majesty. It is the most dazzling aquamarine diamond in the Coral Sea. It is more priceless than those that Lord Elliot refused to accept. But His Majesty sits on an entire country and doesn't like ordinary treasure collections. I don't think it will be easy to please him. Ash curled his lips, raised his hand and patted the other's shoulder, and comforted, His Majesty often says that the gift is light but the sentiment is great. Besides, your gift is not cheap. It's enough to show the intention. Give it to the secretary of the palace in advance before going in to meet His Majesty. The two of them finally felt relieved and followed Ash into the palace in front of them, which did not look magnificent, and even the interior decoration was not luxurious at all. Not surprisingly, the two were searched in the hall by two groups of imperial guards. A leader, his face distorted and ferocious, as if scorched by flames, personally inspected their belongings, even scratching at Upton's thick tentacles, causing him both embarrassment and discomfort. All right, leave the gift box to me. You may enter to see His Majesty. Zack and Upton took a deep breath, then glanced at each other, realizing their companions shared the same uncontrollable nervousness. Following the guards up to the castle's second floor, they watched Ash leave alone and enter a makeshift meeting room before being led to the Emperor's spacious and bright office. The room's furnishings were equally simple and sparsely decorated. At a large, dark wood desk, a man who looked remarkably young put down his documents and looked up at the two with a smile. He wore a casual, beige shirt, his shoulder-length, slightly curly black hair tied loosely back. He wore no regal crown, nor any other dignified ornaments. His pale gray eyes, however, shone with an uncanny brilliance, as if piercing the very heart of a person. This was the Emperor who had single-handedly built the northern capital, swept through St. Valen, and intimidated the southern kingdoms? But the room contained only a few strange humanoid alchemical automatons standing against the walls, leaving no other suspects. Hadn't Mr. Lambert said His Majesty was a high-level spellcaster of unfathomable power? Why was he so young? After a moment's hesitation, the two men adjusted their robes and, in accordance with the traditional etiquette of the Sea People, knelt and saluted each other. Your Majesty, I, the diplomatic envoys of the Abyssal and Coral Sea clans, extend my greetings. May your kingdom be as vast and bountiful as the ocean. Rise, no need for formalities. Harvey chuckled and said casually, Welcome to Spark City. I heard that you arrived in the Northland many days ago after Dean Arturo extended an invitation. I've been too busy with official duties to meet you. Have you been accustomed to life here? He casually glanced at the two men and found that beneath one of them, as Ash had described, beneath his colorful silk robe, there were, indeed, several thick, slippery tentacles. One bulging eye, one octopus. They looked nothing like a subspecies closely related to humans. I wondered how species evolution in this world worked. Just as he was trying hard to suppress a smile, he heard Guyan bow slightly and reply humbly, Thank you for your trouble, Your Majesty. We have had a great time in the capital these days. Lord Lambert has received us personally. We are really flattered. Harvey nodded, picked up another document, and said casually while flipping through it, Since you have requested to see me, you must have come here to ask for something. Tell me, Upton quickly responded, Your Majesty, we would like to ask you to purchase some indestructible ironclad ships in view of the cooperation alliance that your country and my clan have just concluded. If you can also sell us some magic weapons for the ships, we will be very grateful. Civilian ironclad ships? That's not a difficult task, but magic weapons are not. This is absolutely prohibited by the laws of the kingdom, and, even if I agree to sell you the ship, without the magic fuel to drive it, you will only buy a piece of iron floating on the water. Harvey paused and patiently explained to the two people who were stunned, When our navy visited the Coral Sea before, you also saw those military ironclad ships. You should know their unique features. Magic fuel cannot be delivered through the teleportation array. In order to keep the ship moving, the cost of fuel airlift that you need to pay continuously is almost catching up with the value of the ship itself. Zaka hesitated for only a moment, then said decisively, No, Your Majesty. We can afford such a high cost. Whether it is the magical airship you send to transport fuel or the subsequent repair and maintenance costs of the ship, Our clan is willing to pay the full price." Before Harvey could speak again, Upton hurriedly added, "Yes, if your majesty is not interested in real money, we can offset the account with precious sea gems and magical materials." The offer was generous enough and the attitude was sincere enough. Harvey nodded, and immediately the ulterior motive was revealed. "I can sell you at most 5 ironclad ships, civilian models. You don't have to pay a penny for the ships themselves, nor for the fuel and air transport costs within the next year." As he said this, he raised his finger and pointed at the huge map of the southern border hanging on the wall of the study. "I require to sign an in-depth cooperation agreement with you, a cooperation that is more formal and official than the previous friendly alliance, the joint development rights of the Coral Sea." What do you mean by joint development rights? From the Coral Holy City to the Sacrificial Sea. A 500-mile radius of sea areas, all materials, whether it is minerals, materials, fish catches, or even other exploration outputs that have not yet been discovered. I will send the Kingdom Navy to rent a natural deep water port in your Coral City and build a garrison port at my own expense. At the same time, we will unite your 2 tribes to jointly develop the surrounding waters, and all profits will be divided 50-50. Chapter 642 Ocean Exploration. In this era, there was no concept of sovereignty over territorial waters, a territory not defined by land borders. The royal families and nobles of secular kingdoms often did not consider isolated islands and reefs offshore as their territory. Only important maritime trade routes would receive the necessary attention and military garrisons. The vast southern seas, however, were effectively open territory, tacitly acknowledged by all nations. Everyone enjoyed the right to free navigation, but they simply had to be wary of pirates and violent storms. The Millennial Covenant signed by the various southern tribes after the Dragon War explicitly stated that all oceans beyond the land belonged to the Sea People, allowing them to thrive on the islands and reefs, deriving their sustenance from the bountiful ocean. Therefore, for the Sea People, the ocean held no concept of national boundaries or territory. Wherever their coral shuttles reached, they were considered theirs. The so-called deep-sea mineral deposits and migratory fish in the Coral Sea, where the tribe's population is most concentrated, have actually been gradually depleted after nearly 1,000 years of continuous mining and fishing. Otherwise, they wouldn't have used their traditional rituals to send their priests and warriors into the abyss to retrieve the sacred stone, using its properties to lure fish migration there. Your Majesty, with all due respect. From the Coral Holy City to the Sacrificial Sea, both the crystallized coral and aquamarine have long been harvested by our tribe. Fishing is not a lucrative business, and aside from the natural deep-water harbors found in some of the archipelagos near the Holy City, I don't believe it's worth your investment." Zack and Upton were flattered to see that the Emperor wasn't condescending, but rather acted like a businessman of integrity, patiently discussing cooperation with them and sharing the details of the ironclad ship's purchase and subsequent investment. Faced with the Emperor's whimsical idea of opening up the distant seas, they naturally did not want the other party to invest too much and end up losing everything. So they quickly told Harvey the truth about what they knew, trying to make him give up this somewhat ridiculous idea. Even the spellcasting materials that are most in demand in the wizarding world have almost ceased to be produced in the Coral Sea in recent years. If we want to capture sea beasts or collect potion plants that grow in the deep sea, even we need to venture to the edge of the Abyssal Sea Clan's territory and take risks in the most violent open seas. Upton elegantly adjusted the hem of his robe, carefully covering his thick, slippery tentacles. He bowed and proposed to Harvey, "Of course. If your Majesty wants to cultivate a large number of elemental spellcasters, you will indeed need a large amount of spellcasting materials and potion plants produced in the deep sea. But there is no need to travel to the southern waters to build a port and garrison. Our 2 tribes still have brave men for your Majesty to command. If we can gain your Majesty's favor, we are willing to offer a portion of rare materials to the kingdom every year to cover the subsequent purchase of fuel for the ironclad ships. This octopus brother is indeed a decent man who understands the exchange of interests and has considerable political skills." Harvey chuckled inwardly and slowly shook his head, saying, "Honestly, those so-called magical beasts or materials aren't my primary goal, they're merely incidental gains. What I'm truly interested in are the ancient ruins hidden deep beneath the sea." He paused, then emphasized, "But rest assured, I will absolutely not destroy the Sea Tribe's sacrificial sanctuaries. I'll only explore, and I'll definitely consider your experience and suggestions, and will never undermine our friendly relations. As for building a naval port, While certainly intended to protect and facilitate ocean exploration, it can also mediate internal conflicts between the coral tribe and the abyssal tribe, using force to deter the various tribes living across the thousands of islands and reefs, acting as a peacemaker. When encountering the kind of swarming sea beasts that attacked before, he could even help drive them away. Compared to forcing his people to paddle hollow coral shuttle boats and fight those ferocious sea beasts for their lives, His Majesty is truly both generous and merciful. Of course, all this presupposed that these simple-minded, weak sea folk had no understanding of the hegemonic concepts of colonies and overseas garrisons, otherwise, they would have turned hostile the moment Harvey proposed them. Enticed by such generous terms, Zack and Upton felt as if they were in a dream. This audience and request not only secured 5 free ironclads from the Emperor, but also eliminated the need for subsequent fuel airlifts, repairs, and maintenance. They even inexplicably secured a group of heavily armed bodyguards nearby. They had witnessed the strength and weaponry of the Northern Navy firsthand. With them guarding the Holy Coral City, at least the hundreds of surrounding tribes, both large and small, would no longer worry about sea beast attacks and pirate harassment. The Coral Sea Clan and the Abyss Sea Clan, thank your Majesty for your generosity and kindness. We are willing to sign an alliance with the kingdom to jointly explore and develop the surrounding waters. Seeing that the two finally gave in, Harvey smiled with satisfaction and said softly, "Very good. In that case, I will let the ministers below discuss the specific matters and relevant clauses of the alliance with you in detail later. There is no need to rush. Stay in Spark City for a while and enjoy the northern scenery that is different from the sea." Upon hearing this, Zack and Upton hurriedly bowed to express their gratitude. After pondering for a moment, they asked cautiously, "Your Majesty, then the ironclad ship, when can we?" Harvey smiled suddenly and said, "Oh, very soon. If you are really impatient, there are many old ships for you to choose from in Sancher Town, but I personally suggest that you be patient and wait for the Kingdom Shipbuilding Center in Grizzly Castle to manufacture new civilian models. Not only will they have a faster speed, but they will also consume less magic fuel." "We are willing to wait for the manufacture of new ships," Zack and Upton responded in unison. After the cooperation was agreed upon, Harvey casually inquired about some anecdotes from the southern seas, then raised his hand to signal the two to leave. Upton walked to the study door, seemingly unable to contain his curiosity any longer. He turned and said, "Your Majesty, please forgive my rudeness. I really want to know what precious treasures are hidden in those ancient ruins deep in the sea that you are so interested in them even from the north, and are willing to send an army to explore them. Those underwater ruins are often inhabited by extremely powerful sea beasts. The violent winds and waves and the ruins beneath the sea surface can easily cause ships to run aground and sink. Merchant fleets are eager to avoid them, and even pirates are reluctant to hide in them." Harvey chuckled and said lightly, "Aren't there always rumors of treasures in many underwater ruins? Exploring ancient ruins and archaeological excavations is just my personal interest, barely a special hobby." Chapter 643 Newly Arrived Recruits. The train rumbled to a halt at the central station platform, a thick plume of white steam billowing from the massive metal locomotive. Soldiers, in long lines, followed their commander's orders, their backpacks in hand as they orderly disembarked. They stood in formation on the platform, but their heads were uncontrollably glancing around, their eyes straining to take in the bustling spectacle of the northern capital. This was a contingent of new recruits transferred from Wangshan County in the west, returning to Xinghuo City. Most of them were experiencing this wondrous land, often called the heart of the kingdom, for the first time, and it was hard not to be captivated by the novelty of their surroundings. Bale and Sek, rootless people from Fingigan City, were among the arriving recruits, clutching their backpack straps tightly and peering out with excitement. The capital's central station was beyond imagination, and the outer city wall, under construction not far away, towered majestically, stretching as far as the eye could see. On the train on the way here, they heard a veteran second lieutenant, originally from Jackdaw Town but now settled in the capital, explain that the capital used to consist of only an inner city wall. Due to the staggering influx of population in recent years, the Ministry of State Affairs, with His Majesty's approval, commissioned the Ministry of Construction to begin expanding the city's perimeter, formally bringing more land within the wall's protection. The previously densely populated temporary resettlement areas, once mere shanties hastily constructed with clay bricks and wooden beams, have now been demolished and rebuilt into neat, beautiful rows of cement and stone houses. This expansion continues every 6 months, leaving no one sure how many new immigrants the area can accommodate. Due to the large number of new recruits, the military was unable to allocate enough carts to transport them. So, at the command of an officer's whistle, the troops formed two neat columns and marched out of the station, heading for the capital's military camp north of the outer city. This time, we've been transferred from the west to the north. Besides the special training for new recruits, they're supposed to be sending us to the northern frontier to fight those alien monsters, right? Zeke whispered to Bale beside him. A new recruit from Grizz Fort, walking in front of the two, turned and quipped, "You wishful thinking. With their combat prowess, we have no chance of going head-to-head with the lizardmen. I guess besides the training, we'll have to rotate through the garrison regiment, doing the easy work of operating farm machinery and digging canals every day." Although they had only undergone a little over a month of new recruit training in Wangshan County after being drafted, and were temporarily assigned to Rilka, the capital of King Yared, to serve as logistics personnel and clean up the battlefield, they were still considered professional soldiers who had seen blood and faced the cruelty of the battlefield. Although their combat experience was far inferior to that of the veterans, they still felt a longing and desire for the future. Zik curled his lips in frustration and turned to look at the silent Baylor. "You're not really going to let us farm, are you? If that happens, we don't know when we'll be able to avenge our innocent people who died." Baylor sighed, knowing that this matter would always be a knot in Zik's heart. The Silver Moon tribe had been nearly annihilated by the attack of the demon lizardmen, and the vengeful fire of the surviving tribesmen would not be quenched in a short period of time. What's the rush? We'll have to fight them on the battlefield one day. If we don't seize every opportunity to improve our strength now, when we really have to fight face to face, it will be shameful and life-threatening. The veteran's second lieutenant leading their squad came up from behind, happened to overhear the conversation between the new recruits, and interrupted their conversation with a laugh. Zik's eyes suddenly lit up, and he approached the second lieutenant and asked cautiously, "Sir, what exactly is the special training we need to go through when we are transferred back to the royal capital this time? Target shooting, or actual combat exercises?" The old soldier glared at him unhappily and scolded, "Have you forgotten the confidentiality regulations in the military code again? Don't ask questions that you shouldn't ask, and just obey orders absolutely." Seeing that his attitude was not abnormally strict, Bale quickly tried to smooth things over. "Sir, I heard that salaries will increase after you become a regular. This isn't something that needs to be kept secret, right?" The second lieutenant chuckled and explained patiently, "Of course. After you become a regular recruit, your salary will almost double, and all the benefits will be the same. The outstanding ones can even stay in the royal capital and be selected into the Ace Regiment. It won't be long before you can save enough for a down payment on a house and be eligible to buy your own house in the royal capital." The recruits around them suddenly became interested and asked in unison in an urgent tone, "What does it take to be outstanding? How can you be selected into the Ace Regiment?" The second lieutenant chuckled quizzically, then added with a touch of wicked amusement, "Not only will we be assessed on target shooting and weighted cross-country running, but we must also pass the academic subjects, at least to the point where we can independently write a marching log and battle report summary. After all, His Majesty has personally stated, every soldier must be trained to the standards of a reserve officer. A soldier who doesn't want to be a general isn't a good soldier." Everyone was stunned, unable to help but groan softly. Compared to the formation training at the Wangshan County recruit camp, the daily nightly literacy classes were their true nightmare. Starting from scratch was a difficult journey for these soldiers, whose ancestors had come from impoverished backgrounds for generations. The leisurely, slow march diminished the solemn atmosphere of the recruit camp, which already had no missions. As they passed through an outer city square, young men in crimson uniforms even gathered around them, waving bundles of newspapers and enthusiastically trying to sell them. "Sir, would you like a copy of this week's newspaper? It's only half a gold coin, and it contains the latest battle reports from the kingdom's western theater, featuring the heroic deeds of the Northern Army, who conquered the neighboring kingdom of Yared in a single day." The half-gold coin, a brand-new currency denomination, had just recently been issued in the capital. It eschewed printed paper money in favor of a special metal die-casting process. But for the new recruits, whose monthly salary was only 60 gold coins, it was still a painfully high expense. Furthermore, most of them had barely passed the literacy test, so reading fluently was a challenge. Just looking at the densely packed small print on the newspaper was a headache. No need. We are heading to the military camp. Please do not disrupt the marching order." After the students dispersed, Bale leaned close to the second lieutenant's ear and said with a bit of shame on his face, those young men in the capital, have they all passed the literacy course like us? I think they seem to be able to read and write fluently. The second lieutenant glared at everyone with disappointment and muttered, of course, my son is also studying in the junior class of the National Academy. These young men have a much higher level of education than you. When they graduate successfully in the future, most of them will be snatched up by various administrative departments in technical factories in the capital. They will have no worries about jobs. Chapter 644 Weird Recruitment Order. The new recruits from Wangshan County had just arrived at the military camp in the royal capital. Before they had time to reorganize and be assigned to dormitories, they saw a group of young officers wearing the same jet black uniforms, but with a circle of silver-gray embroidery on the collar and cuffs. They were walking hurriedly towards them, carrying a stack of documents. They are a bunch of foxes. From the general staff, the second lieutenant in charge of the team snorted, as if he was a little displeased with these young officers who were mostly from the urban middle class or aristocratic background, and shouted at the recruits, "Shut up, don't lose face for the Western Theater Command." He quickly stepped forward, raised his hand to salute, and then asked in a deep voice, "Are you officers responsible for inspecting the dispatch of new recruits?" The leading officer shook his head and did not intend to explain too much. He took out the document tucked under his arm and said coldly, "What does the dispatch of new recruits have to do with us? This is ordered by the Ministry of National Defense to be responsible for the selection of special personnel." "Special personnel selection," the second lieutenant muttered softly, with a confused look on his face. "The new recruits have just experienced less than 2 months of military training and haven't even taken a regularization assessment yet. Don't think about it so much, you just need to obey orders and cooperate fully." Seeing that the other party had a tough attitude and his military rank was obviously several levels higher, the second lieutenant did not dare to ask any more questions. He stepped aside and shut up. Specialized recruitment isn't uncommon, but it's traditionally reserved for exceptional spellcasters and bloodline warriors. The only option open to ordinary people, perhaps the Northern Territory soldiers themselves, undergoing the bloodline transformation ritual. The conditions are incredibly demanding, but they're also incredibly strict. Why are they suddenly selecting from a pool of fresh recruits today? It just doesn't make sense. The staff officer ignored what everyone was thinking, picked up a brass alchemical loudspeaker and began to explain the recruitment. "All soldiers listen, this special recruitment adopts the principle of voluntary registration. Once you pass the 3 rounds of assessment, you will no longer be allowed to withdraw, and the entire assessment process must implement absolute confidentiality regulations." He cleared his throat and continued, "Soldiers who pass the assessment will be rushed to the front line of the IC in the future, to the battlefield where the enemy is most concentrated and the situation is most dangerous to perform combat missions. Therefore, the Ministry of National Defense does not intend to carry out compulsory recruitment. If anyone does not want to participate, you can follow your second lieutenant and leave now and settle down in the recruit dormitory." For this group of grassroots soldiers from civilian backgrounds, the treatment of the army is much better than working in a factory or farming. No matter whether they join the Defense Force or the Northern Army, as long as they successfully pass the recruit promotion, it basically means that their future in this life is settled. All food, clothing and expenses are covered by the national government. And the military salary can be saved without spending a penny. The most exaggerated thing is that the medical benefits enjoyed by the soldiers can even benefit their families, and even their offspring can enjoy priority rights in school enrollment. Besides the possibility of heroic death on the battlefield, it's practically the most coveted job for any man in the kingdom. And even if you never return, so what? If you die on the battlefield, not only will your body be collected and properly buried at martyrs' cemeteries across the kingdom, but the government will also provide a generous pension, enough for your family and descendants to live out their lives in peace. Your name and resume will even be engraved on a monument. During special festivals and celebrations, even the emperor himself will come to pay his respects, leading the people in a moment of silence, holding white frost flowers in their hands. This is an unparalleled honor that most ordinary people would never achieve in their lifetime. Therefore, young soldiers like Bale and Sex suddenly became excited and turned to look at the new Grizzly Fort recruits with whom they had a good relationship. The latter visibly hesitated for a moment, then gave his 2 comrades a wry smile and said, "Rather than going to the frozen sea front, I'd rather be drafted into the Royal Capital Defense Force." "Don't laugh at me. My wife was already pregnant when I enlisted. Bale and Zeke exchanged a glance, then nodded in understanding. We've decided to sign up. After the noisy registration process concluded, the recruits who had voluntarily withdrawn were escorted off the drill grounds. Bale, Zeke, and the others were called one by one, each writing their crooked signatures in the registration booklet. Then, they formed an orderly formation and followed a staff officer to a nondescript courtyard tucked away in the corner of the barracks. The Royal Capital Barracks already covered a large area, enclosed by barbed wire and wooden fencing, making it impossible for outsiders to enter or exit freely. But the courtyard they were currently in had been given an additional, nearly 2-meter-high concrete wall. With no buildings around to peer through, it looked quite mysterious. Nearly half of the 500 or so recruits had signed up, a percentage that pleased the officer in charge. Now we'll begin the first round of the assessment. Everyone, line up in order and enter the room according to the name I call. Someone will be in charge of guiding you. You must remain silent throughout the entire process. Do you understand? Understood, everyone responded in unison. When it was Bale and Sek's turn to enter, they suddenly realized that what was taking place in this room was nothing more than a simple physical examination. The soldiers were instructed to remove their outer clothing and pants, standing in shorts and vests beside a graduated ruler. Several staff members busily measured their height, weight, vision, and arm span. Soldier Bale, height 178 centimeters, weight, arm span, passed. Soldier Sek, height 177 centimeters, weight, passed. Soldier John, height 169 centimeters, weight, failed. Soldier Karim, height 183 centimeters, weight, failed. The registration officer slammed a red stamp on his page. Only then did Zeke understand that being too tall or too short would disqualify them from the assessment, and the same went for weight and arm span. The officers in charge of the assessments, as if selecting the Imperial Guard of Honor, repeatedly screened according to a set standard. When the two men emerged from the room, their uniforms and military boots clutched, they discovered that more than half of their colleagues still standing in the courtyard had disappeared. The recruits deemed unqualified had already been orderly departed on their alchemy carts. The first round of assessments alone had already eliminated nearly half the applicants, leaving only a scant 100. The leading staff officer seemed to have anticipated this, his expression unfazed. He quickly instructed the soldiers to dress properly and then proceeded to a row of enclosed buildings against the wall of the courtyard. These buildings appeared no larger than the restrooms in the barracks, and besides the closed doors, they lacked even windows, clearly constructed solely for assessment purposes. Each soldier participating in the second round of assessment must enter a separate room and hold their ground for at least 5 minutes. If they can't bear it anymore, they can pull the lever inside the room to open the door and leave, but this will be considered a voluntary surrender. Isn't there a bloodline warrior standing in each room? Zeke whispered cautiously in Bale's ear. What could possibly be so unbearable in such a closed room? Sure enough, within half a minute of the first batch of recruits entering, a series of shrill screams could be heard through the heavy door, but there were no signs of any further fighting. The faces of the others waiting outside immediately turned solemn. Aren't they being beaten by bloodline warriors? Are their spellcasters freezing or burning them? As soon as these words were spoken, the others' faces paled even further. Chapter 645 Fear Resistance Test. As expected, the second round of assessments lasted less than 2 minutes, and the first wave of eliminations was quickly announced. The doors of more than a dozen rooms opened one after another, and a team of lab-coated staff entered, dragging screaming recruits out. These unfortunate souls were pale and blue, their noses and tears smeared everywhere, their steps so unsteady that they could barely walk, relying on 2 people to support them. They were quickly given a potion each and helped to the other side of the awning to rest and recover. Sai took a quick count and felt a sudden pang of anxiety. In a long row of 20 rooms, nearly half the people didn't make it past 5 minutes. With an elimination rate of half, wouldn't a final selection be even fewer? He instinctively turned to look at Bale, noting that his expression wasn't quite right either. But it was too late for them to understand why. The officer in charge of calling the numbers held up the roster and called out their names simultaneously. Bale. Zeke, here. The second batch of recruits responded in unison, dragging their weakened legs into the room. The heavy door slammed shut from the outside. Zeke squinted and stood there for a moment, then, using the faint light filtering through the crack, began to survey the darkened room. The room appeared small, but in reality it was a long, rectangular structure, extending far into the interior. Without light, the interior was invisible. Furthermore, the room was devoid of any furnishings. After scrabbling along the wall, Zeke finally found the mechanical lever that signaled his demise. With a firm pull, the locked door would swoop open. Zeke felt completely prepared. Whether a muscular bloodline warrior or a mysterious black-robed mage burst from the unseen room, he was determined to grit his teeth and persevere, to hold out until the 5-minute test was over. Just as he gritted his teeth and clenched his fists, pressing his back against the door, a deep, middle-aged man's voice suddenly boomed from above. Was there an alchemical speaker installed in this dark room? Soldiers entering this room for the assessment, please strictly follow my instructions and complete your assigned tasks. Your every move is under surveillance. Alright, everyone, please take 5 steps forward. Zeke obediently stepped forward, but suddenly, above the buzzing of the alchemical speaker, he heard another strange sound. It sounded like a thick iron chain dragging on the concrete floor. There is a chair in front of each of you. Please find it and sit down immediately. No matter what happens next, you must not rise from your chair for 5 minutes, unless you decide to give up. Zeke leaned forward slightly, reached out his hands, and sure enough, he touched a wooden chair with a reclining back. He immediately moved forward, straightened his back, and sat down. The test begins. The magic lamp overhead suddenly lit up dimly. Sickling for a few seconds, Zeke noticed the wall opposite was a sliding door. The metal hinges at the corner slowly turned. The chain clatter he just heard was coming from there. What was inside? Before Zeke could relax his stiff body, the sliding door suddenly sped up, and a massive bear, so massive it practically filled the entire room, roared out, pouncing on Zeke in an instant. AWW, AWW. The maw, capable of swallowing half his body, loomed before him. Zeke, regaining consciousness, felt as if his throat were blocked. For some reason, he couldn't even scream for help. The fear and despair deep within his soul seemed to materialize in that moment. A chill ran up his spine, from the bottom to the top of his head, and his scalp began to tingle. At the same moment, from the adjacent rooms on either side, a crash of heavy objects rang out. Even through the brick walls, the screams and howls of his comrades pierced his ears like needles. The levers on the wall rattled. Someone fled from their seat, ran to the door, and frantically pulled the trigger. Zeke remained seated on the stool, but cold sweat had completely soaked his clothes, and his grip on the armrests had turned white from the strain. The giant bear roared and lunged at him, but its body seemed bound by invisible chains, unable to overcome the nearly face-to-face distance. It literally tore the human soldiers before it into pieces. The invisible chain was Zeke's last straw. The creaking sound of metal being stretched and pulled was terrifying. But for some reason, in this utter terror, Zeke chose not to close his eyes and resign himself to fate. Deep within his subconscious, his mind seemed to tell him that the terrifying beast, less than half a meter away, would never harm him. Neither the military nor the government would casually take a soldier's life. He remained frozen, his eyes wide open as he stared blankly at the giant bear roaring and snarling at him. The faces of his family members, tragically killed by the demon lizardman, flashed through his mind. He forcibly endured the 5 minutes that felt like a lifetime. As the officer's voice echoed again through the alchemical speaker overhead, the mechanism of the sliding door panel shifted again, and the giant bear was slowly dragged back inside. The test is over. Everyone may stand. Congratulations on passing the second round of the test. Zeke slowly stood up, feeling his legs feel heavy as lead. He scrambled against the wall to the door handle, forcing his exhausted body to pull the mechanism. The door of the building swung open with a bang, letting in dazzling sunlight. Zeke breathed a sigh of relief, feeling reborn. Bale had entered a building a few doors down from him, but emerged almost simultaneously. It seemed he had also successfully passed the assessment. Their pale, bluish complexions, the cold sweat dripping down the front and back of their dark uniforms, and their footsteps felt equally heavy and unsteady, like they were weighed down by lead. Their experiences in their respective dark rooms seemed identical. As usual, they were given a sweet, calming potion and then, aided by staff, were led to the awning for a short rest. 2 or 3 other waves of new recruits were waiting for further testing. That monster is fake. Bale looked around and found that no one was paying attention to them. Then he carefully leaned over to Zeke's ear and whispered, "I was stunned at first, and it wasn't until the last moment that I recovered and realized the problem." He paused, raised his hand and pointed at his nose. "Have you noticed? Such a ferocious demon-eyed beast, locked in a room with us alone, but it doesn't emit a single wild animal odor. This is almost impossible. Even if it has been raised and domesticated for years, and someone is responsible for washing and cleaning it regularly, it is impossible for it to have no residual smell of food and excretion. Zeke was stunned when he heard this, and then suddenly realized, damn it. He didn't even notice such an obvious clue. It was a waste of his father, who died in battle to protect his people, and decades of careful training and hunting. He clenched his fists and mumbled dejectedly, I didn't notice it. Baylor raised his hand and patted his shoulder, comforting him in a gentle voice, at least we made it through. We didn't give up halfway out of fear, and we didn't bring shame to the tribe, but no one knew what kind of terrifying and strange test was waiting for them in the final round of tests. Chapter 646 Dream Hunting. It was not until the last round of testing that Zeke and Bale suddenly realized that this group of new recruits from Wangshan County had actually welcomed two of the kingdom's most powerful figures, who were present on site to be in charge of the assessment. Minister Chris, Minister Egno, the staff officer, put away his cold expression and greeted the two people who walked into the yard with a smile. Today's batch of new recruits who arrived in the royal capital have now completed the first 2 rounds of basic assessments. Chris nodded, looked around and asked casually, what is the pass rate? How did they perform? 240 people registered, 50 passed, and the elimination rate is close to 80%. The staff officer pointed to the soldiers who were still slumped in the awning with weak hands and feet, and reported somewhat embarrassedly, please don't worry, there will be more soldiers arriving from all over the kingdom in the future, and we will select enough people as soon as possible. Egno shook his head helplessly, as if he didn't have much hope for the final test. Forget it, it's good enough to be able to persist until the second round. The final test will be handled by the 2 of us. Then the recruits were quickly taken to the largest room in the yard. As soon as he entered the door, Bale immediately noticed something wrong. The huge room also had no windows, but the air was filled with a strange smell mixed with strong excrement and the smell of wild beasts. More than a dozen massive iron enclosures stood before them, covered in thick waterproof tarpaulin. But the faint sound of muffled breathing suggested these cages held truly ferocious beasts. Chris and Egno stood still in the room, accepting the roster from their lieutenant. They stated expressionlessly, the rules for the final round require you each to select an untamed magical beast. Successfully suppress it in a mental confrontation for half an hour to pass. Untamed magical beast? What did mental confrontation even mean? The soldiers in the room froze, their pale faces still lingering in a cold sweat. They had no idea what the rules of the test the 2 leaders were talking about. Before they could regroup, the test staff had already peeled back the covers of the iron cages one by one. In an instant, the sleeping, curled-up demonic beasts were revealed, and the room was filled with a sound of heavy, relentless breathing. Wasteland demon wolves, blood-claw bears, one-horned mammoths, black-winged giant bats, serpent-scaled griffins, demonic fire source beasts. What stood before them were all truly demon-eyed beasts, terrifying creatures no matter the inaccessible mountains and forests of the Southern Territory or the vast wastelands. Gulp, someone suddenly swallowed, followed by the trembling sound of teeth chattering in fear among the soldiers. When you're ready, let's begin, Chris said calmly, and he and Egno sat down on the chairs by the wall. His blazing gaze remained fixed on the new recruit standing in front of the cages, as if he had been observing the performance from that moment on. First up, Gregor, the new recruit from Silver Pine, a hunter, stepped out and gritted his teeth. Here, your choice, demon. Devil wolf. As soon as he finished speaking, he was led to the cage holding the sleeping devil wolf. He sat on a chair also welded to the ground. His hands and feet restrained by leather straps, and a strangely shaped metal helmet clamped to his face. A metal hose dangling from the ceiling was pulled over and connected to the slot on the back of the helmet. Zeke, Balor, Beto, here, everyone nervously selected a cage. Zeke, drawing on his past hunting experience, chose a bloodclaw bear, one he had personally witnessed and fought alongside his father and his tribe. These enormous beasts often crossed the Godspeed Mountains and harassed the herds in the desert oasis north of Isengard. Often, a hunting party of 50 would set multiple traps and kill them, costing several tribesmen their lives. Strapped securely to the seat, a cold metal helmet covered his face. While it didn't impede his breathing, the sudden obstruction of his vision made him even more sensitive to the warmth and stench of the giant bear before him. He even had the terrifying illusion of entering a hibernating bear den. Barely half a minute of agonizing waiting passed before a cold voice rang in his ears. Test begins. Mental connection activated. A dizzying sensation, like a fall from a height, overcame Zeke's entire body, causing a cold sweat to pour down his back. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in a dark cavern, having completely transformed from the room he had just been in. Gazing deep into the cavern, a massive blood-clawed bear lay sprawled on the ground, snoring loudly in its sleep. Zeke could almost hear his heart pounding in his chest. What should he do now? Should he face the beast head-on as he had just done, enduring the test for half an hour without fear? Just as this thought formed in his mind, a stranger's voice suddenly rang out, "Kill it. Complete your assessment." "What? Let me hunt this demonized bloodclaw bear alone?" Panicked, Zeke suddenly noticed the previously dormant giant bear trembling, as if it might awaken at any moment. "Oh no. Weapons. I need weapons. My gun." Glancing around anxiously, he spotted a gleaming silver magic rifle suddenly appearing on the ground beside him, even thoughtfully equipped with several fully loaded magazines. Zeke darted forward and picked up the weapon. Instinctively, using muscle memory cultivated through years of practice, he completed the standard sequence of actions, loading the magazine and cocking the gun in seconds. The crisp click of the mechanism reverberated throughout the cave, instantly drawing the attention of the beast on the verge of awakening. Its crimson eyes slowly opened, instantly locking onto the vulnerable prey before it. The bear reared up, unleashing a deafening roar, and the next second, lunged straight at Zeke. Bang! At the sound of the gunshot, Zeke ducked, nimbly rolling sideways, barely avoiding the bear's body, narrowly avoiding the swift attack. But the seemingly heavy bear spun around, slashing its claws just barely glancing across Zeke's shoulder, sending him careening back against a cave wall. Blood gushed from 2 bloody wounds, soaking his palms. Perhaps due to the intense, life-or-death struggle, Zeke felt no pain from his wounds. He quickly rose to half-crouch, and, adopting a standard shooting stance, pulled the trigger again. The shot struck the bear's chest, exposed by its rising body, but instead of piercing its heart and killing it, it only fueled its ferocity. Roar! Another sudden lunge. With no escape, Zeke could only barely raise his weapon to block. His magic spear was instantly swatted away, and the giant bear crushed him beneath its grip. Zeke felt a tightness in his chest, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He desperately scrambled with his hands, and in a flash, he found the bayonet at his waist that would have been attached to the front of his magic spear. As the giant bear opened its mouth to bite down at his head, he grasped the bayonet and thrust it upwards. With a swish, the sharp bayonet pierced through the beast's jaws, lodging deeply in its massive skull. The giant bear froze, then fell forward, pinning him beneath its immense bulk. Another nauseating, dizzying sensation washed over him. Zeke shivered, opened his eyes, and saw 2 prominent figures standing before him, smiling. Minister Egno, with his pointed ears, even led the applause. Pa, not bad. A very outstanding candidate. Chris also raised his lips and praised. The rest were either directly killed by the monster in their dreams, or they barely survived the test time but failed to complete the killing mission. Only you, new recruit Zeke, you are the only one who killed the blood-claw bear that established a connection with you in the dream. Chapter 647 Perfect Match. A battalion of 500 recruits, excluding those who didn't volunteer. After 3 rounds of assessment, only 19 passed. Harvey closed the test report presented to him, frowning and unable to suppress a laugh. Chris shrugged, hands spread out helplessly. Your Majesty, you know how low mortals' resilience is. The less combat experience a recruit has, the weaker they are in this area. We might as well change our approach and seek a breakthrough from the mentally resilient veterans. Indeed, battle-hardened veterans may not possess the extraordinary abilities of spellcasters and bloodline warriors, but in terms of mental and spiritual strength, they clearly surpass these half-baked recruits, Igno echoed. Harvey hesitantly shook his head and slowly explained, it's precisely because of the veterans' years of cultivating a battle mentality and their indestructible mental imprint, that they find it difficult to truly enter into illusion experiments. Coupled with their supreme confidence in their own strength and weapons, once they enter the dream world, their mental energy manifests as powerful magical weapons they've seen and touched in the real world, easily killing the target beasts that match them. This would directly defeat Harvey's goal through the experiment. He desired an equalization of soul and mental strength between the human and the target beast. thus achieving a perfect match and high degree of integration in the subsequent demonized armor experiments. Ever since it was discovered that using spellcasters and bloodline warriors to perform soul stitching with demonized creatures resulted in an uneven distribution of soul energy within the demonized armor, the beast soul, capable of casting spells, was suppressed, resulting in a severe lack of attack power. Harvey immediately realized that by achieving equal synchronicity between the human soul and the beast soul, equalizing their strengths, there was a high probability of transitioning from the previous forced stitching to complete fusion, allowing the subjects to possess the beast souls, natural fighting instincts and inherent spellcasting abilities while equipped with armor, while also retaining the clear and rational mind of a human. He immediately shifted the focus of his experiment to the raw recruits from across the kingdom who had just undergone special induction training. With the assistance of Dawson, a master of psychic spellcasting, Harvey quickly used the magic stone of control to catalyze a ready-made illusion stone and successfully programmed the dreamscape within it, making it perfectly suited for the special recruitment assessment. During the second round of assessments, the ferocious monsters the recruits witnessed in the dark room were precisely the result of visions created by the illusion stone. In the final round, soul connection was used to further intensify the illusion, transforming it into a fully realized mental dreamscape, allowing the soldiers to personally engage in life or death combat with their matched monsters. The most satisfactory result was achieving both a dream kill and maintaining a level of power comparable to the target monster. The soldier named Sek, as reported in the report, achieved this task almost perfectly. The remaining 18 qualified candidates still needed further repetitive training to reach the standard of successfully killing their targets in dreams. But Harvey didn't think there was any need to rush this. Your Majesty, several more new recruits from the southern border of the kingdom will arrive in the capital this month. Should we wait until they've all been screened before collectively training those who have passed? Pierce suddenly asked in a deep voice. Harvey flatly refused. That's unnecessary. These future enhanced warriors weren't meant to fight in large groups. Small groups should be trained to quickly adapt to the demonized armor and familiarize them with the completely different combat methods. Pierce nodded and bowed in obedience, but for some reason, a faint sense of melancholy rose within him. His Majesty seemed to have immense faith in these soon-to-be armored warriors. This might threaten the bloodline warriors, also created by him. He wondered if these two groups, each possessing extraordinary powers, would inevitably lead to conflicts in the future. After all, facing one's creator, the deep-seated desire for closeness and to curry favor was unavoidable. Ugh, Zeke couldn't help but retch softly as he gazed at the stinking demonic clawbear before him. Even after passing 3 rounds of testing and officially being selected for the Special Operations Unit, 2 full days had already passed, and not only did he not even know the unit's designation, he was forced to remain in the small testing compound, daily tending to the ferocious beast's food, water, and defecation. After the brutal battles he'd endured in the dream world, Zeke's initial fear of the ever-sleeping demonic bear had faded. Periodically, an experimenter would arrive to inject it with a sleeping potion, and all he had to do was clean up its excrement 3 times a day, prying its mouth open with a thick metal tube and feeding it life-sustaining minced meat. It sounded simple enough, but when it came time to do it, the overwhelming, sour, rancid odor from the giant bear's mouth was enough to make him nauseous. Baylor, tending to the serpent-scaled griffin in the nearby cage, was in even more miserable shape. Birds of prey were naturally straightforward. While he was still being force-fed mincemeat, the creature behind him was already defecating. The runny excrement even splattered all over him, and the stench instantly filled the room. Ugh, I can't hold it anymore. This is disgusting. Ah. Damn it. Baylor, stop. No. It's not me. If even one person couldn't hold it back and vomited, the entire airtight room would instantly erupt in a chain reaction, with the rest joining in the retching. The floor, freshly washed with a large amount of highly concentrated liquor, was instantly a mess again. What was the point of all this? Zeke wiped away tears from the smoke, forcing himself to suppress the discomfort and continue with his work. The door suddenly opened from the outside, and the staff officer who had previously been in charge of the assessment and selection process reappeared. He hesitated at the door for a moment, then wisely chose not to step in. A bunch of useless people. You have 5 minutes to clean up the scene, then gather in the courtyard. After everyone finally cleaned up the mess and assembled at the appointed time, they noticed that the staff officer, who was already getting impatient, had a strange expression with a hint of mischief on his face. Starting tomorrow, you will officially begin special training, and you will no longer need to serve these sleepy monsters." He raised his hand and gestured to the experimenter standing beside him, and the box full of injection potions he was holding. "Because those monsters will all be awakened, eating and living with you. Cultivate good rapport and bonding." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 648 Currency Reform. Your Majesty, please look. This is freshly printed currency. We haven't even arranged for the alchemy beasts to uniformly cut it yet. Harvey, along with a group of officials, had just entered the heavily guarded mint when the supervisor, who had been waiting at the gate, was clamoring for credit like a treasure. Back when the kingdom was still a frontier territory, Harvey had begun independently issuing paper money, called gold yuan, within his territory as a means of controlling currency circulation. These were distributed to the people, soldiers, and officers under his rule as compensation for their labor. Limited by the territory's own production and resource constraints, this paper currency circulated only in the northern territories. Beyond the Divine Spine Mountains, it was worthless. Whether trading with the major chambers of commerce in the southern territories or purchasing online from other transcendental organizations through the Magic Network Forum, Harvey could only pay with gold, silver, and copper coins. This meant that this paper currency always needed physical gold and silver as a basis for its value, making it unsuitable for circulation as a standalone credit currency in the southern territories in the near future. But now the situation is completely different. Ever since Xavi's official coronation, St. Valen, a populous kingdom in the central southern region, has been completely brought under his control. With a population of nearly 500,000 in urban areas and double the number of rural counties, under the unified accounting and management of the city halls throughout the country, the kingdom is now fully equipped to issue legal tender. Besides the kingdom's abundant resources ensuring internal supply, its export trade, led by the capital, Spark City, is also booming. It produces a variety of magical machinery from the northern region, as well as specialty goods popular in the southern regions. Having signed monopoly sales agreements with major chambers of commerce, Xavi can practically count his money as soon as he wakes up. Frequent wars of resource plunder against nobles within and around the kingdom have also led to a steady increase in the kingdom's profits. Reiner even ordered the construction of a special underground vault between the palace and the mint to store the endless stream of looted gold and silver. Although the treasury was guarded by a squadron of bloodline warriors and shifts, and even had alchemic beasts on duty day and night, the emperor himself had never been there. He was clearly more interested in the new influx of people into the kingdom than the heavy piles of gold coins. Only a few high-ranking officials, like Reiner and Asdalen, understood that to the emperor, money was merely a string of numbers he'd heard mentioned frequently. Any official could walk into his office with pride and receive his personal approval to legally and legally withdraw funds from the treasury for external purchases, as long as it benefited the kingdom's development. Whether the treasury's gold reserves increased or decreased on a daily basis didn't matter, as long as the financial statements Reiner handed over showed that the government revenues of Spark City and the entire kingdom exceeded their expenditures. Everyone knew that the emperor only became slightly angry when he saw a red deficit on the reports. The printing technology of the new banknotes has improved again. Very good. Harvey took the coin plate presented by the mint supervisor and examined it for a moment with narrowed eyes. Reiner, who was standing beside him, quickly added, "The new currency will retain its denominations. 100 is the largest, followed by 50, 20, 10, 5, 1. Considering the potential for encountering low-value goods when the currency is officially issued throughout the kingdom, we've added coins like the half-gold dollar. The banknotes printed in Spark City are now virtually impossible to counterfeit in the southern kingdoms. The mere presence of the exotic magical plant used in residence ID cards makes them easily identifiable by national banks in major cities. A thin coating of rubber fruit, coupled with a precise, standardized printing of mechanical alchemy beasts, ensures that every note of the same denomination is virtually identical. Furthermore, the flexible, moisture-resistant, and mildew-resistant material makes it impossible for even the most skilled craftsmen employed by the nobility to forge. In contrast, the new metal currency, the half-gold coin, was much easier to replicate. Therefore, The alchemical laboratory developed a unique smelting formula, combining discarded silver and copper coins into an alloy, creating this cheap currency with a large circulation but complex casting process. City halls and official institutions across the kingdom have been using the old gold coin for salary payments since their inception. So much time has passed, the public's resistance to this paper currency should have diminished considerably, as Dallin quickly responded. Last autumn, the intelligence services, in conjunction with the Ministry of State, secretly spread the news of Your Majesty's impending demonetization order. Initially, it did cause considerable controversy. Most of the nobles who surrendered their lands to you and lost their fiefdoms held large quantities of old gold and silver coins, and naturally found it difficult to accept this decree. Speculators, adept at buying low and selling high, also complained. After all, without St. Valen, no one in other countries would accept these colorful paper notes, which would severely restrict their business operations. On the other hand, the hard-working common people didn't seem to care much. Aside from the capital, the government built factories and farms in other cities of St. Valen, mostly paid salaries in a half-paper and half-coin format. Citizens could freely go to the national bank and exchange their currency at the official rate. When they discovered that the agricultural products and goods sold in state-owned stores were significantly superior to those sold at private vendors in both price and quality, some gradually began to exchange their currency for paper money. Harvey scoffed and shrugged, saying, "Soon, when they can't even buy a bag of wheat with their moldy, damp gold and silver coins in the kingdom's major cities, they'll know to go to the bank and exchange them all, as long as the government strictly controlled the amount of currency issued, consistently using grain prices as a benchmark, and maintaining the stability of the gold yuan's value, inflation could be largely prevented." Gradually, the people would accept the durable and convenient paper money. Pierce, who came with Harvey to inspect the mint, was a little confused. He raised his hand to find the half-gen yuan from the printed banknotes, frowned while holding it in his hand, and said with some dissatisfaction, "It doesn't make sense. Why is His Majesty's portrait engraved on the lowest denomination coin, while the 20 and 10 yuan banknotes are printed with the silhouettes of farmers, soldiers and workers? The image of His Majesty the Emperor is actually inferior to that of his subjects. This is simply the opposite of heaven. The new currency was designed entirely in accordance with my instructions." Harvey, anticipating this troublemaker's questions, explained with a smile, "The highest denomination banknote features the kingdom's castle emblem. Beneath it should be the people who have dedicated their lives to the nation's development and construction. That's undeniable." There was another point he wasn't about to explain to a simpleton like Pierce. The emperor's portrait would be printed on the highest circulation, most widely circulated small denomination banknote. This would maximize public trust in the new currency's legitimacy, demonstrating the ruler's political authority while subtly fostering a deep connection between imperial power and the nation's legal tender. The emperor's personal credibility was the anchor of the nation's currency. Chapter 649, Earl's Business. Heinz Webster had just stepped off the magic-powered train when he was stunned by the bustling bustle before him. The long journey to the north had strained his already pampered body, and the train hurtling beneath the sacred Spine Mountains had nearly shaken his old bones apart. Fortunately, his attendant had promptly purchased some motion sickness medicine from an official vendor patrolling the train. He bravely took it, and it finally eased his discomfort, but at least he didn't vomit in front of the trainload of wealthy businessmen, embarrassing the established nobility. He was standing there, glancing around, when a familiar voice suddenly called out, "My Lord Earl." Turning, he saw it was Dickinson, whom he hadn't seen in ages. Chief Knight Dickinson, who had served alongside him for so long in the old capital. This was the first time Heinz had seen him in casual clothes in public. The straight, dark black short uniform made him look very energetic. The silver-gray embroidery on the collar and cuffs was also very unique. One could tell at a glance that this outfit was very expensive. "Ahem, stop calling me Lord Earl, Dickinson. I'm no longer the Earl of the Palace." Dickinson nodded awkwardly and offered, "Come with me into the city first. There are so many people coming to the capital lately. I'm afraid you won't be able to find a hotel on your own." The Earl raised his eyebrows and asked quickly, "So many people are here to ask to see His Majesty the Emperor." "Your Majesty is not someone you can see whenever you want. They are just some merchants from other places and foreign countries who come here to compete for purchasing rights during the commodity fair." As he spoke, he led Heinz and several followers out of the station, raised his hand and pointed to the alchemy wheel car parked on the smooth road. "According to the rules, Picking you up today is a private trip, but I violated the rules and used the department's assigned bus. I really shouldn't have done that? But the higher-ups have always been tolerant and should turn a blind eye. The Earl cautiously boarded the open carriage, tugged on Dickinson's sleeve, and whispered, "So, what you told me in your letter is true? Are you now the one with real power before His Majesty the Emperor? Not me, but my general staff, but due to confidentiality regulations, I can't go into detail." Dickinson turned to examine his old colleague and explained gently. The Earl nodded in understanding, patting Dickinson on the shoulder and sighing, "If you hadn't written to me so many times, informing me of the political trends in the capital, the chaos that Earl Westwind secretly stirred up in Golden City some time ago would have nearly implicated me, as a powerful minister of the previous Grand Duke of St. Valen and one of the few former royal bloodlines. Hines, in order to protect himself and his family after the fall of the capital, almost dissipated most of his family wealth and took the lead in surrendering his fiefdoms. His many performances greatly satisfied His Majesty Harvey. His decisiveness in sacrificing his own arm to save his life was due, on the one hand, to his ability to assess the situation, and, on the other, to the fact that the Earl's family wasn't solely dependent on fiefdom taxes. They had numerous businesses throughout the country, the most important of which was the trade in sea salt. After news of the demonetization order spread, he had believed it was an attempt by the Emperor to seize all the kingdom's wealth and abandon the nobles who had chosen to pledge their loyalty. Furthermore, the state-owned market in the old capital had a near-total monopoly on the trade in grain, agricultural products, and other commodities, squeezing private businesses to the point of exhaustion. Unable to contain his temper, the Earl dispatched agents to repeatedly contact Count Zephyr's spies within the city. He then formed a secret alliance with a group of nobles similarly driven by the demonetization order, seeking to ally themselves with the church, in an attempt to lead an army to retake control of Golden Glory City. Fortunately, several letters from Dickinson completely extinguished the Earl's delusions, bringing him to his senses. As the letter cryptically hinted, within a few days, the aristocratic circles of Jinhu City were purged with lightning speed by the Emperor's secret police and the Ministry of Justice. Numerous nobles were accused of collaborating with foreign powers and plotting rebellion, and were imprisoned like a stream of grasshoppers. Having long since lost their fiefdoms and military power, they were powerless to resist. Earl Haynes, however, escaped death thanks to the Emperor's personal praise for his integrity during the purge, and his wise decision to abruptly halt the process. His personal trip to the capital not only served to personally thank Dickinson, but also to explore the situation and learn the specific impact of the impending demonetization order. Spark City began using gold and dollar banknotes privately minted by Your Majesty long before the city was built. This is a mandatory decree representing the Emperor's will, and there is absolutely no possibility of it being abolished or reversed midway. Dickinson sighed, and understood the Earl's intention. He still patiently advised repeatedly, "The sea salt trafficking business controlled by the Earl's family is a good business that makes a lot of money every day. As long as you strictly abide by the laws of the kingdom, sell at a price limit, and prohibit foreign sales, nothing will go wrong anyway." The Earl rubbed his hands and said anxiously, But Your Majesty's state-owned Chamber of Commerce, whether it is selling grain or importing sea salt from Faroes, it is cheaper than the price I sell it at? If this goes on for a long time, my business will only be gradually eroded, and in the end there will be no profit. Moreover, the ironclad cargo ships sailing on the Ralph River day and night are far superior to ordinary sailboats in terms of carrying capacity and speed. The fleet of the Earl's family Chamber of Commerce is obviously behind the Emperor in terms of transportation time alone. I heard that after His Majesty's purge of the nobles and wealthy merchants who oppose demonetization, many people in cities across the country are planning to move to neighboring countries with their wealth and savings. From now on, perhaps only state-owned chambers of commerce will be able to conduct business smoothly in St. Valen. Why do you think so? Dickinson frowned and asked, "My Lord Earl, have you forgotten the most important point? After His Majesty ascended the throne, he abolished commercial taxes throughout the kingdom." Commercial taxes. The Earl was stunned, then suddenly came to his senses. That's right. In the past, when running family businesses, they often borrowed the name of royal nobility and never paid any taxes to the Grand Duke. Instead, as a tax-eater class, they extorted a lot of taxes from the people, but the price they had to pay was no less than paying taxes. When necessary, the Haynes family's fiefdoms always had to respond to the Grand Duke's wartime call-ups first. The knights and squires trained by the family were also needed to fight for the Grand Duke, and the expenses of maintaining the army and horses had to be paid by themselves. In a sense, this was the Earl's equivalent exchange for tax-free business and profiteering. And now, His Majesty, while confiscating the nobles' fiefdoms and military power, hasn't imposed any additional taxes. In this regard, he seems to treat merchants of both noble and commoner origins equally. So, Your Excellency, do you understand? The state-owned Chamber of Commerce serves the lower classes, ensuring their daily needs. If you insist on competing with the people for profit, His Majesty will inevitably suppress you. But if you change tack and start anew, your noble status and His Majesty's approval of your style will become a far greater advantage and a source of support than anyone else. Chapter 650 The Emperor's Credibility. 3 days later, massive billboards were erected in various civic squares throughout Spark City, officially announcing the kingdom's decree abolishing the old currency and replacing it with a new. As usual, the Ministry of State Affairs dispatched officials to deliver policy briefings, drawing large crowds of onlookers. Spark Weekly, published that same day, also featured the newly released decree on its front page, detailing its details in eye-catching large character posters. The citizens of the capital, long accustomed to the old gold yuan banknotes, showed little reaction. Instead, they enthusiastically discussed the new metal coins, the half-gold yuan and the quarter-gold yuan. The old gold yuan's excessive purchasing power made it difficult for them to quantify the value of the bills when purchasing cheap imported goods. The smallest denomination, a gold yuan, became a near low price in the capital, a source of discontent among the frugal citizens. A pound of freshly baked white bread at $1 was certainly a bargain, but half a bundle of long-stemmed beets shipped from Sancha Town, also costing $1, was a bit hard to accept. So, on the day the law was promulgated, many people lined up outside the National Bank early, eagerly exchanging their old banknotes for a large number of small denomination coins for daily use. For a time, the streets and alleys of the capital could be heard with eager chatter about these shiny little coins. Earl Hines, still lingering in the inn, naturally received the news and quickly ordered his attendant to fetch him a newspaper. He had originally planned to visit his old friend Dickinson and use his connections at the Ministry of Commerce to try to get tickets to the Royal Capital Fair. However, Dickinson was a stubborn and rigid person. While he normally wouldn't mind using the official bus for personal purposes, he flatly refused to help the Earl. Fortunately, while he refused to help in official matters, he privately showed considerable care for his former colleague. When he invited the Earl to a high-end restaurant, he also brought along Baron Ross, who currently worked with him on the general staff. Ralph, like Hines, faced a sensitive position due to being a remnant of the Ralph family, yet the Emperor had made a groundbreaking move to recruit him into the military. This generosity truly impressed Hines. These back-and-forth banquets, coupled with a plethora of novel and magnificent architecture in the northern city of Spark City, captivated the Earl, who delayed his return indefinitely. Unexpectedly, he actually waited until the demonetization order was officially issued. Receiving the newspaper from his attendant, he saw the headline, "Breaking News. The new currency order has been officially issued." The next item read, "The United Kingdom of St. Valen and the Northern Territory will issue new gold dollar banknotes effective immediately, replacing the outdated gold, silver, and copper coins, and also replacing the old banknotes. The new currency is protected by the kingdom's highest law and is mandatory for circulation within the kingdom. Indeed, for ordinary people working in state-owned factories and farms, the difference was simply a paycheck in new notes instead of the old ones, with virtually no difference in value or purchasing power. But for the nobles who relied on their family's influence to conduct business in their home countries, and for the chambers of commerce that frequently plied across borders, this decree held a certain allure. Accepting this condition meant that the Emperor could arbitrarily and forcibly purchase any private goods within the kingdom, simply using the paper constantly printed in his own mint. In other words, it was no different from plunder. The National Bank will permanently provide a new and old currency exchange service. All residents of the country may exchange their gold, silver, and copper coins for new currency at any time, according to the prescribed ratio. Foreign chambers of commerce and trade organizations may also exchange their earnings for old currency, but the bank will levy an additional 10% tax to maintain and protect the country's favorable business environment. This means, any foreign merchant wishing to take their earnings from St. Valen back home must voluntarily pay a 10% tax to the Emperor. Otherwise, they'll be left with nothing but a wad of colorful paper, unusable in other countries. This offers numerous benefits to merchants whose business is confined to the country. Not only do they enjoy complete tax exemption, but they also gain a slight advantage over foreign merchants in price competition. Heinz gradually began to realize that this currency decree, personally issued by His Majesty the Emperor, seemed to harbor a number of profound implications. While the forced issuance of a new currency appears intended to plunder the wealth and assets of the nobles and merchants, a closer look reveals it's actually a blatant attempt to protect domestic commerce, leveraging the emperor's immense power. After all, the emperor himself isn't concerned that such brutal tactics will deter foreign merchants from setting foot in St. Valen. Simply possessing the two trump cards of the mana-powered machine and the ironclad ship is enough to attract the attention of the major merchant houses with influence throughout the southern border. Not to mention the vast monopoly on plague potions and the various high-end goods produced by Spark City. Any shipment of these to the southern kingdoms would be a frenzy among the wealthy and powerful. At this thought, Dickinson's words to him that day about changing direction and starting anew resurfaced. Perhaps abandoning the Lamargin sea salt trade and securing a monopoly on the export of a specialty product from His Majesty could be the key to the Heinz merchants' rise. If Spark City's goods were exported, the gold and silver coins earned could be used to purchase foreign specialties and resell them domestically. This cycle of exchange would eliminate the hassle of repeatedly exchanging paper money for gold and silver coins, and eliminate the 10% tax loss. Given the popularity of Spark City's specialties, this would be a guaranteed win. Of course, the Earl also remembered the key point Dickinson had repeatedly emphasized: never compete with the people for profits. Grain sales were banned, agricultural prices were capped, and state-owned chambers of commerce were selling daily necessities for the lower classes at low prices, completely squeezing out profit-seeking private merchants. Furthermore, once a trade trend was established, many foreign merchants would undoubtedly save on taxes and reserve a certain amount of gold coins for future purchases. With the emperor's power and credibility, they would undoubtedly understand that these pieces of paper could indeed buy goods of equal value, while also being waterproof, moisture-proof, and easy to carry. Over time, this special currency, circulated only within St. Valen, would likely spread throughout the entire southern border. As long as the goods produced by Spark City are irreplaceable, the gold yuan banknotes will gradually erode the authority of traditional gold and silver coins. At that time, His Majesty, with the power to mint coins in his hands, will undoubtedly become the richest and most powerful being in the southern countries. His wealth will be almost limitless. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.